officially call the meeting to order, and if everyone could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Bremer, are you okay?
So we're going to start off with, there was a request for follow-up questions from Selectwoman Lefkowitz to the tax assessor who's on the line regarding appeals and some additional information. Nancy, could you frame your request again for Ross, because he wasn't on the line yesterday?
Yes, good morning, and thanks, Ross, for coming back. Sorry to pull you back. Can you just talk a little bit about, do we know what the revenue loss was for these appeals? I wrote these down, so sorry if it's a little out of context. Of the 650 that you referred to yesterday, how many were approved or denied? And you mentioned the number 110. Of that 650, did that full 110 go to Superior Court? You know, just a little bit more about what that entails.
This is Ross. If that was directed towards me, I just lost my connection, so I unfortunately only caught the very end of that question.
I was just basically asking you to talk a little bit more about the appeals, revenue loss as a result, if that's something you can talk about. And you mentioned a number of 650. How many were approved or denied? And then 110, what did that number refer to?
Sure.
Did 110 of those 650 go to Superior Court? Just again, just a little bit of an understanding of your numbers and what those appeals were like.
So the 650 was the number of appeals that went to the Board of Assessment Appeals. I can look up their exact numbers if you want it, and what they decided. I'd have to pull the spreadsheet up. But of those 650, about 110 went to Superior Court, which is the next step beyond the local Board of Assessment Appeals. This year, we have about 115 appeals to the BAA. They have yet to be heard. Those will be heard in March.
And what's involved in terms of revenue loss, or when we get an appeal, what just goes into that, so there's a better understanding of how that works?
So the board over the past several years has probably run from 3 to 7% of the value that's appealed in their reductions. I don't have figures handy, but I could get those for you as to what that translates to in assessed value.
Mm-hmm.
If you want, I can pull up last year's.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Sure.
I appreciate it. It's context too. It's
Absolutely.
trying to understand the budget holistically.
So last year, of the total appeals, they reduced almost 50% of what was heard. And that reduction was a total of $30 million, almost $30,250,000 in assessed dollars.
And historically, we can believe that we'll see a similar trend.
Yeah, I suspect it'll be a little on the higher side this year. I think the 3% was on the low. Again, they've ranged typically from 3 to 7. This year, the total appraised value of what's been appealed is $20 million.
And does this involve, for us, outside counsel and is it, do you have a way of saying how much sort of goes into those appeals?
When it goes to the BAA, there's no outside counsel involvement. That's strictly the
Yeah.
volunteer elected
Yep.
board and those. Once we hit once it goes to Superior Court, then there is a town attorney involved to represent us and, file whatever needs to be filed with the court. And we do bring in an outside appraiser to, advise us and give us that second opinion. The appeals start off fairly slow. All these 650 from last year, I would say 90% of them were scheduled for their first pretrial for the first 3 to 4 months of this year. So we're really just getting into the bulk of it and getting additional information from the appellants to kind of see what their position is, more detailed information than we would have had through the revaluation. And that's when we start making decisions as to, the next step. At that point, the cost from my budget for the appraiser is relatively light.
Mhm.
He's just doing a look at it. He'll give a cursory view of the information, maybe look for some comps if it's residential, and give us an opinion as to whether our value is good or are we, off the
Yep.
mark and we need to make a settlement, if it's in our best interest. So a lot of them will get settled through, without going much further than that. We're seeing a couple now where we're going to.
And you don't know to the tune of what the cost is for the,
I would say that it's probably in the neighborhood of under $1,000.
okay,
It's not very costly at that point.
yeah.
Once we go to the next step, we have a couple that we're doing that with now, where he's going to produce restricted appraisals, which is
Mhm.
not a full appraisal. It's not what we take to court, and it's a little less expensive. So on a commercial property, we're looking at, say, 3,000 to 5,000 for that. And that will firm up the data for us and give us a much firmer number to negotiate with.
Yeah, so
know,
that's
you-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just to say, that sounds like a better process moving forward.
Yeah, and so we, if we can't come to an agreement with, without getting into detailed information, then we go to the next step.
Okay.
If at that point we still cannot reach an agreement, then we'd have to have a full appraisal done, which would probably be in the, $5,000 to $7,000 range typically. And if we go to trial, there's court time. So, we're probably looking, if we go to court, $10,000 to $12,000, in cost to the appraiser. So what we're seeing is right now, there's not much expenditure. But as we move through these and the bulk of these get processed in through the court system, the cost could potentially be heavier. It'll be weighted on the back end.
Okay. And in terms of your time, and is this a huge time suck for you in terms of, I'm just thinking about moving forward, the cost benefit.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
It's a lot of time. We're having pre-trials just about every week, and it's been a lot of work.
And is there something missing that would help with that? I'm just curious in terms of what
No,
makes it
it's
less so. It's just the nature of the beast.
it is what it is. We just have to work through them, and that's what we're doing. We've got, the team we have with the attorney and the appraiser. It's they're a good team, and we work well together, and it's been a good process so far.
Good. Thank you for answering my questions. That's it. I wanted follow-up information on that. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
Thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Ross. Tom, do you have any questions for Ross?
I'm all good. Thank you. Thanks,
Tom?
Ross. I'm all
All right,
good.
Ross, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, just one moment, I gotta grab my budget book. Okay. The next item that was requested was for Selectwoman's office budget. So I'll open that up for any questions.
Yeah, I just think it's, would be good for people to hear what the differences are. There's some additional increases. Can you tell me what page that's on? I'm sorry.
That's on page 29, it starts.
If you can just talk about how you came to your budget, what's different from last year?
Well, there's not a whole lot of change in it. Do you have a specific question? Regular payroll went up a little due to raises that were voted on by the Board of Selectmen that were in line with the unions, which is typical. The only thing that's really changed, we have, we've added $3,000 for training for the office, and that's on top of the regular CCM trainings, which we utilize the free trainings. I put in additional $3,000 for trainings for my staff.
Yeah. One of the things that we had talked about, I remember, and maybe it was the first year, and I know it was brought up last year, for the chief administrative officer, that was a new position with your administration. And we were going to hear again from time to time metrics. I think it goes into the greater question about job descriptions, which we talked to Jim yesterday, but just sort of like the ROI on the addition of the job. And I'm not challenging it. Or I'm not arguing that it's not warranted. I just think that I wanted to use this opportunity to say that sort of update of that job reporting in would be, you know, I'd still encourage that, because I don't think we've gotten that from, in this case, Mr. Bremer. So it would just be something I would want to get a report on, as was discussed when, you know, we advocated for the position.
Right, so the position was added, this is the third year that the position has been. It was added, I think, about a month after I took office.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously we've had this discussion numerous times throughout the budget season and during other meetings. Mr. Bremer handles a lot of additional items. He works directly with department heads on my initiatives, my modernization initiatives, but most notably is the point person on the fill pile and the amount and FEMA issues and Penfield, which have equated to hundreds and hundreds of hours of meetings and phone calls and emails and reports. And as I think I mentioned during last budget season, the work that Mr. Bremer did ended up saving the town when he looked over through the purchasing issues from the Board of Education, over $1 million in savings the town was able to realize. Is there any other additional specific questions you have about his job?
No, I just think it would be great, especially since he is handling things of such great magnitude. It would be great moving forward periodically to get reports from him, to hear from him some of those, so we don't wait till next budget season to talk about that again, especially since the issues he's working on are so significant. So that's all. It's more a comment than a question. And I hope to get those updates, you know, periodically throughout our time in the coming year. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to
Sure.
just I want to give my perspective on this, only because I've deal with Tom regularly, and I know it's about the position and not Tom as a person. But right now, he's been my main conduit to get information related to the fill pile and to the remediation of Gould Manor. I worked significantly with Tom last year on setting up the townside capital planning. That was a huge effort. I know he's taking the lead on a lot of the discussions relative to FEMA and the issues we have there with Penfield. The negotiations, quite frankly, we need to have with FEMA and the state relative to remediation as well. As we discussed yesterday with the elimination of the risk management position in the human resources area, I think it would be extremely beneficial to have Mr. Bremer with his legal background involved in the insurance, particularly for property and liability related to that. And I've also worked with him or had discussions with him relative to kind of an independent voice on purchasing. Not that that comes away in any way, shape, or form from the CFO or from the first select woman, but as Brenda pointed out, the issues that we found last year with the Board of Education and some of their purchasing habits on specific items. So I think there's been a lot of value at this point created by the position. And my hope is that the position would expand in future years to take on some of the more management of some of the other departments. So that would be my perspective on the position.
And Tom, I want to echo that this is not about an individual, nor is it actually about the job itself, because I
Sure.
appreciate the value. But what you
Sure.
did just actually highlights, because you're saying you worked with him directly, and I think that's great. I just think from a public perspective, I think, you know, it's a big ticket item in terms of the job. And again, not questioning its value of the expense, but because he
Agreed.
handles such, you know, things of such import for the town, I think it would
Yeah.
be great for the town to hear from him directly with reports, you know, regular reports, not just.
I don't, and
Right,
Nance,
that's the way we hear from
I don't
department heads, et
disagree.
cetera.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
don't,
that's
I
all.
don't disagree, Nance, and I think that I just wanted to put it in the perspective of my experience because I think you're absolutely right. Some of these positions, whether it be the chief administrative officer, the chief of staff, whether it be some of the other positions, you don't hear from them publicly a lot.
Yeah.
So your point's very valid as it relates to what are they working on, what does the public need to understand. So I get where you're going. I just wanted to provide from the work that I do,
Mhm.
where I've worked with Tom in the position on a go for and in the past, and my recommendations on a go forward basis. So
Thank you.
So if I
Sure.
could just jump in, you know, obviously the chief of staff and the chief administrative officer, all of them actually, all the department heads, they report directly to me. And I am the face of the office. They provide me with information. They sit in on meetings on my behalf because I'm only one person and can't be everywhere. And they do the work of the first select woman's office, and then I report. So when I come before town bodies and report about the fill pile and all of those details, it's because Mr. Bremer has sat in those meetings and then has briefed me and given me the information so that I am then able to provide that information to the public and to the boards and commissions. Similarly, the chief of staff, as you both know, and I know that you both have interacted with our chief of staff, and I know Nancy, you have interacted with Tom Bremer and have emailed him extensively for questions over the last few years on all kinds of things, which obviously I wouldn't be able to do because of my scheduling. So he's been invaluable as an asset to me, to our residents, and being able to get down into the nitty-gritty on all of these very intense and complicated issues, and then reporting to me so that I am able to then do my job effectively. And that's typically how the structure works. Thank you. Is there any other questions about my budget, my office budget? None?
Thank you. No.
Not from me.
Okay, very good. All right, our next item is legal, and the questions will be answered by our CFO and our budget director. So I'll open it up to the board. Do you have specific questions regarding the legal budget?
Yeah, this is a question that just keeps coming up. I know I had it last year. Just a breakdown, and perhaps it's not a specific question that can be answered today, but perhaps before. And again, what page are we looking at for legal services? If someone,
It's page 62, Nancy.
um, sorry, hold on one second. Again, this is our, I would just advocate, this is our yearly opportunity for the public to hear about all that goes into the budget. And I think legal services was some of the big issues that we're facing as a town. Bill pile, lawsuits, just the day-to-day business of, what it is to do business. Ross just referred to it. It would be great to understand how it breaks down the role of town council versus outside counsel, what the legal services budget goes towards. I just think a little bit of a public explanation would be helpful.
So I'll just give an overview, and then Frank and Jared can ask any specific questions. But as you know, we are a very big town, and there are a tremendous amount of items that need legal representation on. We contract outside legal services for many items. Obviously, Mr. Baldwin couldn't do everything. We contract for our appeals, our tax appeals. We are utilizing, as I've mentioned many times during bill pile updates, we utilize Attorney Miller for all of our environmental items. He represents us to DEEP, and he's working with us also on FEMA issues. We have attorneys that assist us through conservation issues. They advise and they answer questions to our Conservation Commission and from our Conservation Department. Most notably, we spent a considerable amount of money working to fight against the Aquarian issue regarding water, as you both are probably very aware of. And so we spent a lot of money doing that. We had a Fair Plan group that was actively engaged in that, and we had the attorney working directly with them and the town to lessen the amount of water that was diverted away from our town. Let me think. The town attorney obviously answers numerous questions. He spends a considerable amount of time, and I mean considerable, answering questions from the Board of Finance, from the RTM, and from our board, from the Board of Selectmen, as well as answering questions from me on charter and things of that nature. He works also with our HR department. We do contract out attorneys for labor issues, most notably contracts, negotiations, and I think I probably covered most of all the different areas where we utilize legal services for the town of Fairfield. Oh, I did say tax appeals, yeah. And tax appeals, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific?
Yeah, I mean, it's just not broken down by line items here, and I appreciate all that needs to happen, and I appreciate the fact that our town attorney is but one human, and no way would he be able to cover all that, but it's just not broken down. So I'm curious if the public is allowed to know how it breaks down, how it works. Is it, how many hours, what's town attorney versus outside counsel? What is, I see in the description, it says what it covers, but isn't a breakout of how that works. So,
Sure. I'll have Frank come over and speak more closely about
okay,
that.
thank you.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Frank.
So to answer your question, and I'll just run through the amounts for the litigation areas, I guess you could say, and how they put to the $707,000 number in the budget. So for general litigation, we have just about $320,000. Litigation related to conservation, we have budgeted for that $25,000. Tax appeals, $190,000. As we had discussed yesterday, we have number of unsettled contracts that need to be negotiated, so that, the number for that is $147,000, and also, some money in there for, additional, charter revision, expenses, for the lawyers there. So, and the way we came to, most of these numbers is by looking at our current litigation, expenditures and kind of projecting out. So kind of looking at what we're doing now and saying, what do we expect to do next year? So that's how we arrived for the numbers for that.
Where are we tracking this year, Frank, on legal expenditures?
I know we're on budget. I don't have the exact number in front of you, but I could get that to you.
Yeah, would you mind just making sure that we're on budget? So, to Nancy's point, remember and forgive me, this is as much for the public as for anybody else. The general counsel for the town, Mr. Baldwin, is also not an employee of the town. He is an outside service, so he is included in these fees and professional services as well, correct?
Correct.
And the one thing I know that was conspicuous and that you did not say is anything related to the fill pile, but any expenses related to that, would these go through here as well?
No, they don't go through here.
Where would they go through?
I believe those are done through the fill pile account and the capital account.
So they're part of the bonded expenses or the cost set aside for the fill pile. They're not included in these
No,
expenditures? Okay.
no, you can't bond for that.
Yeah, no. Well, that's what I was kind of questioning. So where are they?
I'm gonna have Caitlin, come up and address those questions.
Hey, Caitlin.
Frank, before
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
Morning, guys.
Hi.
As you know, there's a couple different buckets for these fill pile expenses. One being the bonded amount that you just
Yep.
asked about, Tom. I think it was
Yep.
about $1,686,000 a while ago, maybe a year ago or so. That was specific to a couple of, I think, 7 or 8 sites and WPCA. But
Yep.
in addition to that bonded amount, there's been this capital non-recurring fill pile coming from our surpluses. As you can recall, like just this past year, we put like $6.8 million from surplus in
Yep.
there. So those legal fees are coming out of those dollar amounts that came from surplus, because you can't bond those legal fees.
And those legal fees, that I agree with you on that. And those legal fees, they're tracked separately, and the accounting for that can all be put to the side so that we
Yeah.
can know exactly what the fill pile costs the town at the later date.
Yes.
And the contract negotiation costs, I think Frank had said, they actually go through this account, even though they're kind of human resources related, they stay in this legal account, as does the tax appeal expenses, legal expenses, that all flows through this one fees and professional services account, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I think to Nancy's point, I think in future years, it'd be nice to do exactly what Frank did and include that in the budget book to just say what's actually flowing through here. And go ahead, Nance.
Well, to this point, to further that point, if I'm, just a citizen who isn't listening to this and haven't heard of Frank's breakdown or Caitlin yours, and thank you, good morning.
Morning.
I'm curious why we can't put it in the budget book for this year, to look at the breakdown, because I think it isn't broken out in terms of what is contract fees, what is, or, negotiation fees, and what is, it's just because it's just a broad statement, it's really hard to know. And I think it would be interesting for people to note that this is not fill pile related. You have no way of understanding the breakdown when you look at this budget. And I guess why wait for a future year? If you have the information, it seems, unless I'm missing something, it would be important to include here for this year.
And I only meant for us because we're in the midst of it, so that's fair.
But we
Okay.
vote Monday, and again, it seems like it's work that's already been done. Frank, and Caitlin just articulated it. So it would be my request that we would have it included in this year's budget book before we vote on Monday.
Jared, is that a follow-up item we could
Yes,
get them?
we can do it.
Okay.
Thanks. I just think it's helpful for people to see and to understand. And again, not for any gotcha reasons. I think it's the opposite. I think it just helps people frame how we're spending the money in this regard. So
Okay.
that not having it just makes it seem like we're hiding something, which we're not. So,
No, it's a legit question. We could definitely follow up on those buckets that Frank itemized.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. The next item is the ECC fund, and I actually have Chief Calamars here in the room to also answer questions, and I have Jared, and I have Chief McCarthy, who's also actively engaged in ECC. So do you want to start by asking some questions about it, or how would you like to proceed?
Hey, Brenda, what page are we on?
160.
160?
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can ask questions. I don't know if the gentlemen want to start with something.
Well, why don't I start by giving you an overview of, exactly what we did. And so in a general sense, we did the same thing with ECC, or proposing to do the same thing with ECC that currently happens with WPCA, which is to create a separate fund for it. So all of the expenses related to the ECC will flow through there, and as well as all the revenues. And so if you want to go through the book, I can walk you through it step by step.
Yeah, please do.
So let's start on page 14, where's there's the revenue. You'll see the revenue for the ECC. And what I should clarify is that this is the previous revenue amount for FY22. So when we, in 22 this year, we had it budgeted as part of the general fund as an org in the general fund. And so you can see the revenue in 22. What you'll notice is that in 23, that revenue is gone because we've moved the revenue into that separate fund, which I'll get to in a minute. So that's sort of the revenue part that was in the general fund and is now gone. So now let's cut to page 159 in the book. And so similar thing here. This is the way it is currently being budgeted as part of the general fund and an org in the budget. And so you can see that a lot of the lines, except for the very last one, everything's been zeroed out for 23 because all of those lines have been moved into the separate fund.
So where is the separate fund? Where's the detail? Yeah.
I'll get to that in a minute. So what you'll see in the bottom line here, the 1736, 174. So that is the amount that is coming from the general fund and essentially subsidizing the separate ECC fund, because currently there is not sufficient revenue, and frankly it was never sold as and never thought that there would be sufficient revenue to make it completely 100% self-sustaining with the revenue that they are bringing in and will bring in the future. And so this is the general fund's portion to essentially subsidize it. So now if you flip to page 252 in the book, you'll see there, that's the revenue that's in the separate fund. So those line items that you saw in the beginning in the general fund have been moved here. And so what you see is the other ECC subsidy, which consists of other towns for the, exclusively other towns. Westport, it also includes a small piece of New Canaan. And then what we did was we are projecting that there's going to be another town to come in. I'm not going to go into detail because nothing's been finalized. And I also don't want to, don't want to talk about the, what might get negotiated with this other town for their fee. But the projection is that they would come in January 1st of 2023. And so that's embedded within that first revenue number of $1,071,815.
Hey, Jared, I'm going to ask on that, that maybe we go into private executive session and get information related to this third town, because I have no idea, based on what you just said, what our exposure is to if that doesn't happen. Okay. So I understand not wanting to talk about it in public for a variety of reasons, but I think to get comfort on this budget and that we can cover the 3.1 million of expense, I need to understand that third party situation a bit better.
So, Tom, why don't we move forward then, because there's other people on the line and
Of
stuff.
course.
Instead of having to click everybody off and come back and all of that. So.
Yeah, the other thing
why
I
don't we
don't,
just move on?
yeah. The other thing,
Let's move on to finance.
can I ask
Can
another?
we move on to,
No,
Yeah,
I
and I
haven't,
also have a question.
all right, so,
and I have a
all right,
question.
so why don't we ask some regular questions, and
Yeah.
then we'll move on to finance, and then possibly at our, if we finish before our 12 o'clock break, we can then go into executive session before we start our education portion of the day.
Sure, but let me,
that works?
Nance, if I can follow up on one question, then
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to you. The other item, I understand what you're doing, moving it out of the general fund. I don't know the implications of that from a charter perspective and who needs to vote on that. And I want to make sure we're buttoned up on that. So can we just check and see if we're following the appropriate protocols on that? Again, I'm not questioning the reason for doing it, but it's new information and we're pulling it out of the general fund and establishing another fund. I'm assuming the auditors and everybody have been alerted and are aware of this. And I just want to make sure we're doing it the right way.
And I guess
Okay.
if I could, oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Well, it just bears to mind for me, similarly, this is maybe a broader question for the next presentation. I also would like to better understand the implications, but these funds generally, we talked about it yesterday in terms of the police cars. And we're aware, Parks and Rec is kind of a hybrid of this and WPCA, but I'd like to understand what other funds there are that are out there. And I'd like to talk about oversight. It may be something that you understand in the finance world, but I think the lay people and the public, certainly I don't fully have a grasp of it. In the spirit of transparency, what other funds are out there outside of, the realm of this normal process of the budget process? How does oversight happen? I would just like to have a better understanding holistically of where this fits in. Now we're talking about introducing another fund, and again, not questioning it in terms of it being right or wrong. I trust that it's the right process. I just want to understand what other funds we're working with, how oversight happens. And again, it just brought to mind that it was probably a broader conversation, not just as it relates to this new proposed fund
So
mechanism.
We can, you know, have a separate conversation about the other funds. This one what we're proposing is that this be a budgeted fund. This is completely different. And we actually, one of the reasons that we separated this out is it was a request from, 2 members of the Board of Finance last year, including the current chair, to separate this out so that we can provide additional accountability, and transparency. So this is, you know, that was one of the reasons that we broke it out into its own separate fund. And, you know, we can look at the additional towns coming in, when that does happen, and also track the expenses better that are specifically related to this operation.
And it makes sense. It just, as I said, it for me just raises questions, and maybe it's just about being able to explain. You know, it makes sense, as I said here. I'm interested in what Tom just asked, but I did have that lingering question from yesterday when we talked about it vis-a-vis the cars, and I hear you saying it's separate, but maybe at some point we could have that conversation.
At some point we can.
In this process, rather, you know, at some point in this process.
So Nancy, these are budget hearings, and the hearings are supposed to be what's in the budget. Now, the outside funds, which have been in existence since the beginning of time, are something that if the Board of Selectmen wants to know more about, I can put it on a future agenda for us to have discussions about, which is completely appropriate and fine. But that's not those aren't funds that are included in the budget. So it would be inappropriate to have those discussions now or even part of the budget process, because it's not included in any part of the budget. It's not a driver, it's not a cost, it's not in the budget. They're funds that are utilized outside of the budget process.
Okay, so what about yesterday then, and perhaps I just didn't understand, then because aren't you using one of the funds for the police cars?
Correct,
So
we are,
in the budget,
and that is the one fund that we are using because it has grown. It's been there for a long time, it's just grown exponentially over the last several years. And we thought it would be a good idea to use that instead of letting it sit there.
Yep.
Use it toward capital needs.
And I'm not arguing that. I think it's a great point. The question is,
we can discuss that fund because we are going to be using that in the budget. That's I would say appropriate.
Right,
but again, all the funds the town has.
Except for my point being, and I hear what you're saying, but if other funds exist that we may be able to apply, if we don't know what they are, we don't know how we can apply them. And so it's hard to offer solutions, perhaps, you know, at Monday's deliberation, if I'm looking to offer solutions and aren't fully aware of the scope of what's available to us. So I would just argue that it is appropriate even in its absence, because maybe it's a mechanism that we could use, as you did creatively and very rightly so. I'm not arguing with the ability, you know, I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying, isn't it an opportunity to explore how we might? And certainly we should talk about it outside the budget process as well. But I would just argue that it's an opportunity.
Well, I agree with you. And we, you know, obviously we've spent, you know, many months going through all of this as my administration and everybody included in that. And we didn't see any funds that would have been able to address any kind of budgetary item. This was the one fund that we did identify because of its size. And Jared came to us during our budget meetings and said, this fund has grown and we could potentially use it to offset and pay for the police vehicles. But we didn't come across any other funds of that size or anything that would have an impact on the budget.
And again, I would just say,
obviously, we'd be happy to discuss the funds in more detail after the budget season, and we could potentially identify if there is any funds that we didn't identify that were large enough to have an impact maybe on the following year's budget.
well, it's clearly, I'm not, gonna go back and forth, but I am not privy to that information and can't use it as a potential solution or kind of make an informed decision. So just sort of saying for the record, it would have been really good to understand what was available prior to this budget meeting, but I appreciate the opportunity at a future meeting to better, understand and to learn about what is available and to understand the accounting mechanisms and oversight mechanisms. Thank you.
Okay.
Brenda,
Um,
one other fund that is, and it is part of the budget process always, is a Park and Rec's revolving fund. And I realized going over our notes yesterday, this morning that didn't come up. So Jared and or Frank, if you know what the balance in that fund is, I'd appreciate knowing, because that's a fund that is monitored and under purview and is available when it gets, I think that the amount used to be, I believe, $200,000. So I don't know where that stands right now.
Caitlin can come up and talk about that fund if you'd like.
That'd be great.
I don't.
It should be a question. Hey, Tom. Hi, Nancy. Just to give you a feel, so I'm looking at the annual report for 2021. Anthony's, I call it Anthony's fund, the Park and Rec Trust Fund had, as of June, about $1 million in there. But don't forget, what happens is people prepay for camps in February, March timeframe for the camps that happen, basically at the end of the school year, July, August. So it's kind of artificially high at the June 30 end of our fiscal year every year. So that number clearly depletes rapidly in the summertime.
So where is it now?
What we do have in the budget, so, I mean, as of today, I'm not sure, but we did take in revenue this fiscal year, even though we had nothing budgeted, going back to your threshold of being over $200,000. So they look at that fund at the end of September, I believe, September 30th.
Yep.
And anything over that $200,000 mark does come back to the town in terms of revenue. I believe this year we took in, and I'm just going off memory on the quarterly, maybe $30,000, which we had zero budgeted for in fiscal 22.
So when we,
so I believe there's a revenue item. Go ahead.
Yeah, since they review it at the end of
So I
September,
think there's a revenue item though, Tom.
I understand, but since they review it at the end of September to see where that is, I'd like to know what the latest available information is on that fund balance. Because you're absolutely right, as of June 30th, it's not the appropriate time to evaluate that fund. But I'd like to know where it is, if they've got September, if they've got November, if they've got December, I'd like to know where that is.
So you want to know where they, so given, I just pulled out the budgeted line item too. It's about $100,000 coming in from that fund in this budget, in the fiscal 23 budget.
Right.
And that's on page 11.
So if
but
that's
yeah, I mean,
the case,
I could run that balance
hang on a
whenever
minute.
you want.
Hang on a minute. If that's the case, then here's my point, right? Then the available amount in that fund is somewhere to the tune of $700,000 or $800,000, right?
How do you figure that out?
Well, you said that the fund balance as of last June was $1 million. So then you turn around and said the annual budget for the amount was to go into the budget is about 100,000. So I'm assuming that
in 23.
Hang on. So I'm assuming that in 22 you took 100,000, or will, and in 23 you'll take another 100,000.
No, 22.
Tom, could you let her finish, please?
In 22, I'm going off my memory for the quarterly that just happened a few days ago. I think we took in about 30,000 and we had zero budgeted. So that was the excess over the 200 last September 30. So the balance as of last September was about 230.
Wow. It was 230, so you took in 800,000 of revenue?
So I'm saying this past September of 21, we look at it as September and we take the overage, anything over 200,000.
Understood. So let me ask a question. Here, let me ask then. I get what you're saying. If you had $1 million as of June, and you're saying now right? That as of September, you took in 230. You were down at 230, which means there's a delta of 770, right?
Okay,
So that 770 represents revenues that were recognized by the Park and Rec department outside the general fund. Is that right?
no, I'm saying the 230, if that was the balance, and I'm using rounded numbers, I think we took
Understood,
in
understood.
27,000 this year.
Yeah, understood.
So that would be the net of all revenue taken in.
Right.
Really, the revenue was taken in prior to June 30, right? If I'm going to camps, because that's just one of their biggest, and, you know, soccer happens throughout the year and a whole bunch of things happen throughout the year. If I just look at camps, just because I think that's one of their bigger
Yeah, I understood.
programs, they take in revenue February, March, which would have been in this million, and then they're using it all in July, August. That netted to a 230 at the end of September.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They use the 770 as essentially revenue to pay expenses through the course of through the course of July, August, and September.
Mr. Flynn, can I suggest that we follow up with you with the information? Because I think we have we can probably get actual information, right? Rather
That's
than,
fine. That's fine.
You know,
That's fine.
speculate on what's happened. All right.
Yeah.
But to your point, yes, that is one of the other funds that does impact the budget, and I believe that's the only one.
Right.
And again, there is that 100,000 coming in the fiscal 23 budget anticipated. So just doing the rough numbers is that Anthony is anticipating a balance of 300 come September 30. He keeps the 200 and the 100 comes to the general fund.
Yep, that's what I thought. But I want to make sure we know what the numbers are there because I hadn't heard
Okay,
that
yeah, I can
reported
run
in a while. Yeah.
Can I just state for the record that this current discussion of the Parks and Rec Fund is really demonstrating why off-budget funds should be part of the discussion and part of the process. So I just want to say that for the record clearly. And even if there's just a list of those budget funds, even that would help. But I just wanted to state that for the record. Thank you.
Okay. And just one last parting point. In the annual report, not that you guys really delve into it as much as the Board of Finance does, there's a listing of these funds.
Yep.
Towards the back. So it kind of gives you a feel for the types of funds out there. But we could
Yes, it
certainly,
does.
you know, go through them and give you some details.
Right, and they do get reported to the Board of Finance through that report.
Yep.
So
That's how I
just to
knew about
answer
the
Nancy,
Park and Rec Fund.
there is oversight by the Board of Finance of all of these funds.
Okay. I mean, I hear you, but I think that they should be part of this discussion.
Okay. Are you done?
Yep.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right. Do you have any additional questions on ECC?
I don't until we go to private executive.
Same.
But none, just regular questions on the operations or anything?
Not right now. It's
Anyone?
too hard. It's changing too much to do a variance analysis, quite frankly. So really, I just want to understand what the analysis is.
We'll move on to finance now. For any questions, I know, Tom asked for debt service and some other items.
Yeah, I'd like to look at, you know, we have good rates right now with pension and OPEB, and I would just like to understand holistically how these good rates, how it impacts. So we know how that's impacting the budget. So then where the sort of operating expense increase is really coming from with the good. So I would just like to have a good sort of holistic look at where we landed. Given the, you know, the rates.
Specifically, debt, are you looking at debt service specifically? Is that what you're asking about?
Well, I mean, I just think it's good to look at, like, you know, again, OPEB, pension rates, like
Yeah.
We've got good numbers right now. And the other question I have is, oh, sorry, you can go ahead. I can.
Okay, you mentioned OPEB specifically, so let's go there. If you turn to page 230, 232 in the book. So between those pages,
Sorry, I cut out for me. What pages?
230 and
it's starting on
232.
page 230 and goes through to page 232.
Yep.
There's backup in there.
Yep.
But the budgeted amounts are on page 230, again, allocated to the different funds, the general fund, the WPCA, and the ECC, and the amount related to the police and fire plan separately. So you can see the amounts there. These are all done by our actuary. These were done when H&H was our actuary. We have the OPEB actuarial evaluation is done every 2 years. And so this was done last year around March. I think we got the final number. So what they do is they do the projection for the OPEB ADEC over a 2-year period. And if you look at pages 231 and 232, you will see that.
So Jared.
And so down at the bottom of, yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Down at the bottom of page 231, you'll see fiscal year ending 2022, and you see the amount there that they're recommending. And this first page on 231 is for the town plan. And then there's another one for 2023. And so because they do it every 2 years, we take that 2023 number and use that for next year. And then, so next, around January, February of next year, we'll have a new valuation from them, which will cover FY 24 and 25, which is kind of startling to say.
Jared, when did they start going to 2 years for OPEB? I don't recall that, to be honest with you. Was it before you were
Caitlin
there?
says it's always been.
It's always been 2
yeah,
years?
definitely. Caitlin says it's always been that way.
Okay. I don't recall that.
And not uncommon. It's
Yeah,
not
no, I
uncommon,
get it.
especially for OPEB. Okay, so 231 is the town plan, and 232 is the police and fire. So those are the amounts at the bottom of each of those pages.
For which plans?
And, so so you'll see that the amount on page 230 that says the total town plan, that first page
Yep.
that we looked at, the $4,246,850.
Yeah,
You'll see
ties.
that foots
Yep.
to page 231 at the bottom.
Yep.
Okay, and then for FY 23, when you look at, I'm sorry, for police and fire, you'll see the same thing, the $5,596,727, that puts to the bottom of page 232.
So where's the,
we're
so that covers OPEB, I get it. Yeah. Where does it, where's the pension?
Okay, so pension, if you go to page 229, 229.
Yep.
That is the breakdown of pension. So we just, at the end of last week, the number was just finalized for 2023. Pension is different, where the valuation is done every year.
Yep.
And so they literally just did the presentation of the ADEC to the retirement board last night. And so, that was really the first official, publishing of their projection for what the ADEC is. We got the preliminary number late last week, so we were able to include it into the budget. I'm happy to follow up with their presentation. I can forward it to you so that you can see, what we did. We just, like I said, we didn't have time to, we didn't have the information at the time to be able to put it into the budget. And typically we would get this information earlier, but just because of switching actuaries, when you go from one actuary to another, there are always, some complications, different methodologies being used. There may be some differences in data that's being used. And so all that stuff needs to get worked out. And so, so it got to us a little later than normal. I can tell you, generally speaking, what happened to the number. So it's pretty flat. The number for pension is pretty flat compared to last year, the ADEC number. The town side was down, and it was down because, I guess a little morbidly, people were dying earlier. They had more people die earlier. And on the police and fire side, that one was up fairly significantly. And the reason for that was that there were retirements were happening earlier. And so, and they probably, that trend probably should have been caught a little bit earlier. And over the last, kind of phased in or gradually put into the ADEC over the last 4 or 5 years. But for whatever reason, it wasn't. And so we are, we're kind of taking that hit all at once. Fortunately, it worked out where there was a balance. There was an offset between, the town side being down and the police and fire being up to the point where they almost net each other out. But I will send you that presentation from the actuaries.
Yeah, please. And you said, the one thing I want to follow up on is, Jared, you said last week they gave you the preliminary numbers, and then this week they gave the final presentation. Was there any difference between those preliminary numbers of late last week and the final presentation last night that you're aware of?
Nope, no difference.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so that's pension, OPEB. Anything else that you want to cover?
Yeah, let's go to, well, go ahead, Nancy, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm reading, so go. I'm looking through.
I wanted to go to debt service, but I'll wait.
You want to go there now?
Go.
Yeah, as long as Nancy's okay, I can go there now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
So debt service, you'll see. Debt service is on page 225,
Yep.
the backup for it. You'll see, so I'll just step you through these accounts and the numbers that are on that page. So the 150,000 is the, cost of issuance of
Yep.
bringing our bonds to market, which is, so the next, so we'll look at the next section, the next kind of piece of this, the next, so let's say 5 or 6 lines, has to do with the long-term, our bonds, the actual bonds that we issue.
Yep.
And so, you can see what the principal due on those bonds is $18,555,000. We do use bond premium from our sales, and on long-term bonds, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but we typically take this in thirds. We can use it over a period. So when we have, we take premiums on one issuance, we can use that over a period of 3 years. And typically that's what we do, is we break it up into thirds.
Yep.
And use that to offset our debt service payment. So, so it's kind of, this section of it is broken down into the next portion of the long-term bonds is the interest related to those bonds. Okay. And then if you go down to the next section, about halfway down the page is the section that has to do with the bands or the short-term notes that we issue. And there's a principal piece of that. There's also there's an interest piece to that. And then, which is the 276,659. There's also a premium related to bands, which we have to use in 1 year. So that's what that is. Again, that helps to reduce our overall debt service payment.
So with the exception of the utilization of the premiums, Jared, most of this stuff comes from the work that's done with our outside advisors related to the bonds and what the expense is going to be?
That's correct. Yeah, we work with him to
And then you
determine
just,
these amounts.
yeah, and you've just used past practice as it relates to essentially amortizing the premium into this, correct?
Bond counsel rules.
Okay, bond counsel.
Yeah, the bond counsel tells us we can only take that premium over 3 years.
Right. No, that part I'm sure, but you've amortized it equally over the 3 years is what I'm saying, I guess.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a small component at the bottom related to clean water fund. And this is the last year of that, Caitlin?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the last year of that one. And so, you know, all those things put together, our debt services is down this year, and you could see that in the shared expenses line. That's on the very first page of the budget. That's what's really causing the decrease in debt service.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions there?
I'm glad to step through this and make sure it's been signed off on. There's no other assumptions related to refinancings or anything, obviously, with the interest rates being what they're doing and all that kind of garbage, correct?
Correct.
Right.
We keep in constant contact with Phoenix Advisors.
Yeah.
He lets us know of any refund opportunity.
Yep. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
And yeah, I would like to see that actuary report. So since they just issued it, can you flip it?
I can flip it to you, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, seeing no further questions on the finance, and we are, what about, 11:15? So what we'll do is, I guess we could just, Dave Kelly, are you on the line?
Hey, Brenda, I did have one question before we go into private executive, if you might. And again, it came as I was flipping through the book again this morning. So I don't know who would be appropriate to answer it, but I noticed that for FairTV, our fee there went up by 20 some odd thousand year over year. And I just wanted to touch base on what that's related to, because I know there was a lot of talk about different grants and things they got in prior years, and they obviously provide a valuable service to the government, to the taxpayers. But is there anybody that can speak to that in the room?
Jackie's here, she can.
Hi, Tom.
Hey,
yeah,
Jackie.
So, we talked to Jerry in great lengths about, the need to have staff support from FairTV, for the virtual meetings. And so he has found a couple, you know, part-timers, and essentially the extra funding is for extra hours, so that they can assist with the hybrid meetings once the hybrid technology is installed. And so that FairTV would be on site to, not just record the meeting, but also, you know, make sure that the, WebEx, Zoom, or whatever it is that we're using, is functioning and hosted properly, to take some of the pressure off of the board chairman, in the room. So, that's the thought. It's just additional hours for additional staffing.
So this isn't related to any decisions or loss of funding from third parties from prior years. This is truly, as you go towards this new solution to allow virtual meetings, what you're going to need
Correct.
from them. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Brenda, can I ask a more broad question about funding in the budget while Jared is still in the room?
Sure.
I've
Jared,
got
can you come up?
and maybe it's not for Jared specifically. It's probably a combination. I've gotten some inbound inquiries in the last 24 hours about confusion around capital projects, and it probably is more of a you question, Brenda. Sorry, but if you could just explain in terms of which go into the operating budget, how it's, you know, what we decide to pull out of the operating budget. I just think that there's some confusion about where capital projects fit in broadly, the recurring versus non-recurring, and what does go into the budget, what doesn't. So if you could just explain that for the public, because I did get some questions about this. Some were specific questions about specific projects, but I think broadly, I've gotten some phone calls about how this process works.
So the, you know, I'll just tell you that, you know, the dollar amount, there's a dollar amount threshold that we use, and any of the qualified eligible projects based on the, you know, our bonding policy would fall into non-recurring if they're between $100,000 and $1 million. So those are capital, non-recurring, bonded projects. Then we have, you know, beyond $1 million, those would be capital projects, strictly capital projects, that, you know, any of the ones that qualify based on the bonding policy. Now that I'll say that the third category that you see in the budget and pretty much well, not each of the departments, but in some of them is the capital outlay, which are things that are typically under $100,000, that get purchased through the operating budget.
And then specifically dollar amount aside, and maybe this is where Brenda comes in, how is it decided which of them come, you know, which specifically, not based on dollar, but the projects themselves? What's that process?
So for the most part, it's the dollar threshold that tells us what goes where. There may be, do we have anything over?
I just mean that there are some projects which we talk, I meant like specific projects that don't actually make it in a budget year, because we obviously have to pick and choose. We can't do all of them. So when you're deciding between a few of the same dollar amount, what goes into that process?
You know, it's hard to say without if you had an example for me of what, you know, a certain thing, because we typically. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, so Nancy, what you're asking about is the capital plan,
Well,
not the budget. So you're asking how we're going about, and so I guess you're referring to Dylan's email to you and Tom.
that, but I'm talking about the ones that go into the budget.
Today.
I understand it's outside, but those are the capital projects. I get that. Those are outside of the budget.
Right,
I'm
so-
talking about the ones that land in the budget.
So, well, what Jared said, it's based on funding, right? So over $1 million could potentially be bonded, and non-reoccurring is under $1 million. But the long-term capital plan, where we had the workshop, where I laid out all the projects, the education shared theirs, we shared all the towns. And as I mentioned at the end of that meeting, I wanted to put together an internal working group with Board of Finance, the education people, my team, and talk about putting together a 5-year plan, a real 5-year, not a waterfall, but an actual 5-year capital plan that the bodies could vote for, sort of a sense of the body. Obviously, each item would have to be put on the agenda by me as they would come along, but to have a sense of the body from all the town boards of what projects do we want to have on our 5-year plan. And so that's the work that we're going to be doing. And I actually spoke to Jared, and I told this to Dylan actually the other day on the phone, was we were just saying how we should probably put that internal group together sooner than later to do at least the 22-23 year, so that we have those projects put together. And as I mentioned to the education staff when we had meetings before the budget season, that I want us to be between 30 and 37.5 million per year on bonding, because I don't want us to get up against it, and we're going to have those discussions during those meetings. So it means that we have to decide, there's a whole bunch of competing interests. You got to set aside some money for emergencies, you set aside funding for WPCA, and then the rest of it would be split between the town and the education, because I don't think that's ever been done before. It's kind of been just sort of whatever, you know, the administration chooses to pick off the waterfall and put on an agenda and then say, okay, let's vote on it. I think it should be more collaborative and put together. So that's why I want to have, and frankly, other towns have 5-year plans that all the town's residents can know what it is. The financial people who look at our assets and our debt service and all of that can know what we're looking at, and we have a clear and concise idea of what we're doing. And so that's kind of where I'm going to be heading and how I want to handle it.
Yeah, and any thoughts yet on, you said sooner than later, but any thoughts on what that group would look like or how it will be made up, or
Well,
not yet?
I mean, obviously, we're in the budget season now, but I spoke to the chairwoman of the Board of Finance about this a week or two ago, regarding how I want to put that group together so we can start.
And anything you can share publicly or not yet?
I haven't started it yet, so I don't have anything besides what I just said.
Okay, thank you.
So if I'd like us to move into executive session. I'm hoping that we could be done, you know, we could have that time, and then we can be back on schedule for our education people to be able to join us at 12:30, I believe I have it. Yes, and then our lunch break at 12. So, Dave Kelly, are you on the line so that we can go into executive session?
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to move Anthony, Christine, FairTV, and Scott to the lobby. They can stay connected if they want. And then when you come out of executive session, I can readmit them to the meeting.
Oh, thank you very much.
Do you have to vote or anything to go to executive session before I stop recording?
Oh, yes. Can I get a motion to go into executive session to discuss the ECC operations?
So moved.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Dave.
This session is no longer being muted.
Of executive session, and I just want to note for the record, we just discussed the ECC. We did not take any votes or anything like that. Can I get a motion to come out of executive session?
Yeah, so moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we are a little ahead of schedule, so we're expected to take a break at noon, and then we're expected to have our superintendent and Board of Education present the education side of the budget. I just want to, for the record, the follow-up items is a list of funds that are not in the budget. Have Jared and Caitlin email those information. I know it's in the budget in the back, as Jared indicated, but they'll send some additional information, and any other information on the revolving fund, and then an actuary report that they will email to you before Monday's meeting.
Great.
Is that good? Good? Okay.
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so can I, get a motion just to recess until 12:30?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Can
The
everyone hear me?
recording has started.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good
Okay,
afternoon.
so, I'm gonna, hi, Mike. Hi, Christine. I'm gonna make a motion to, come out of recess.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we are in the afternoon for the public's, edification. We are in the afternoon session of day 2 of the town's, budget hearing process. And I am, we are now having, Mike Cummings, and we have a Board of Education Chairwoman Christine Vitale on the line. We have, the school district staff on the line. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mike, if you want to, say a few words and then open up with your presentation.
Absolutely, thank you, Ms. Kupchak. And I'm going to ask Dr. Savichentik's on the line if he can, we have a short, well, we hope it will be short presentation for you, for the selectmen tonight, this afternoon, excuse me. So, James, are you able to bring that up? While he's doing that, again, I want to thank the selectmen's attention today. We are going to go through a series of slides that highlight what we're doing in our budget and the reasons for the request. The slide deck that you'll see reflects the reductions that the Board of Education made at the end of January, and we'll talk about that as we go through. We also are going to leave, we encourage everyone to take a look at the full slide deck. While we're only going to be addressing the slides at the beginning, there are a number of slides towards the end and in the appendix that provide further detail. Is he there?
Mr. Cummings, he was in the waiting room waiting for the host to let him in.
Oh, can we let Dr. Savichentik in, please?
I'm afraid he's logging into the wrong WebEx if he's in a waiting room.
Okay. Courtney, are you on?
I'll forward them the last email we got from Jen.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry for this. We'll get this settled.
Mr. Cummings, he's coming in now.
Okay, great. There he is. All right. James, can you present the slide deck?
Yep, sorry,
Thank
I'm
you.
late. Thank you.
No, that's okay. All right. If you can go to presentation. Great. Oh, there it is. Okay. Is that visible to everyone?
It's small.
It is small.
Too small for my old eyes.
James, yeah, there you go. That better? No, you had it.
That is my full screen. I'm not sure what you're seeing.
We're seeing both the format where you see the slide being presented and the next slide.
Maybe it's on my other, let me unshare and share again, 1 second. They must be seeing.
There you go. There you
Is
go.
that a better one?
That's better.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. All right, so if you could go, we'll go to slide 3, James, please. All right, I always feel compelled that when we begin any conversation about budget, that we root it back in the mission of the Fairfield Public Schools. This is the longstanding and always relevant mission of FPS. We develop our budget beginning at the school level and through the district work in November, December, keeping this mission in mind. Go ahead, James. Just an overview of kind of what we've been happening, as if people in attendance don't have an awareness. Clearly, the last couple of years have taxed all of our resources, both personal, professional, and in the Fairfield Public Schools in particular. And the budget that we're going to discuss today really reflects the challenges that we've been facing for the past almost now exactly 2 years. And what we certainly have come to understand in the past year is that as we move through the pandemic and the logistics of dealing with the disease transmission and all those accompanying concerns, we are going to be dealing, even for a longer term, with the ramifications of the pandemic and its impact on both our students and our staff. Go ahead. Timeline real quick. We initially presented a 6.22% increase. The board and their adjustment reduced $1.5 million to a 5.42. It's important to point out that at that, the real way the board was able to accomplish that was a lot of those funds were drawn off of the ARP ESSER and ESSER 2 grants. We have, Ms. Laborious has presented to the board, and we can provide for you, if you wish, updates on what those grants currently consist of. We have reserved money in there for some of the work that we do need to do over the next 3 years in professional learning for our staff, supports for kids, both in the summer programs for our elementary kids and after-school programs for our 6-12 students. Okay. So we come to you today with that 5.42% increase. Next slide, please. So the next slide is really, it's almost a mandatory slide at this point. This is our, over the past few years, the average increase or the increases. Certainly this year is going to top at this point the highest column, and reflects again the challenges that we are facing. In broad terms, this slide speaks to the causes of the 5.42%, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to take a minute to go over these. Really, the major driver of our increased cost is the special increases in special ed. We're going to go through those slides in a little bit, provide some context for you. Mr. Mancusi, of course, is here to answer specific questions around that. But it really is on all fronts, both the special ed staffing costs, tuition, transportation, all those things are having an impact on our budget. We are seeing, we anticipate increases in some of our supplies and maintenance costs, driven by inflation and, of course, the supply shortages that are out there. We have, as always, our contractual increases for staff and benefits. We are looking at, the board has put a priority on increasing cybersecurity for our students and staff, and that comes with a staffing requirement that we're looking to have completed for 22-23. And again, technology needs that continue to confront us as we go forward as older technology ages out. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit today about the draft district improvement plan and some of the ways we are going forward, as next budget year is the first year of that next 5-year plan, and some of the early indicators we have of how we want to address improvement in the Fairfield Public Schools. As always, our focus, and this goes back, of course, to the mission, our focus is on the well-being of the whole child. We are going to talk today and answer your questions about expansion of the Early Literacy Academy, promoting the racial equity work, the DEI work that's currently going on in the district, addressing the learning gaps, both in regular and special education that we are seeing, and of course, and then related to that is funding special education. if you take a look at this, and we'll get into this in more detail, this PowerPoint is full of charts. But if you take a look, you'll see, if you look at the second column to the right, the columns, and Ms. Laborious, I want to thank her. I should have said this at the beginning. She's done a tremendous job putting this presentation together, and of course through the budget. But we've broken out there in the budget to budget increase. You'll see the large increases in instructional services, which is largely driven by special education. Further down, the contracted services and the tuition pieces that are really driving a large percentage of the budget. And then capital is largely driven, as we said, by the technology increases. And I ask you that if you pay attention to the coloring that she supplied, we're going to break this out a little bit further by category or by a larger category. So if you think about where special education may lie across several of these categories, the ensuing slides will further define how the budget drivers are impacting different accounts. And on this next slide, you'll see that if you take a look, the colors tie back to the slide before, but if you take a look, for example, at budget driver and general budget drivers, staffing, salaries, and benefits, there's a 2.72% increase, 2.72 portion of our total increase is driven by this, almost exactly half. Operation maintenance, utilities, and transportation. And then down below is special ed, and that's another 2.26% increase. So if you look at the last couple categories, the IT equipment replacement and the other changes that you'll see, there's relatively small, under 0.5% increases in those other areas. So that leads up to the total 5.42. And again, one of the things I point out is Ms. Laborious has provided these narrative pieces to the left on the slides. I won't get into them, but again, after meetings and when you have nothing to do, they're well worth reading because they give us some sense of what our work has been and will be. Again, broken out by category. We're going to talk a little bit further about new staff and what that entails. We have made some budget adjustments driven somewhat by enrollment changes that are happening at both the middle level and elementary level, but also realignment of paras in particular. We're going to reapportion from existing paras needs for new paras where that can happen. But the new staff is broken out a little bit further down below. You'll see that it includes priorities for the Early Literacy Academy, implementation of the middle school block schedule, and I'm going to take every opportunity to say this. The middle school block schedule only has an impact of a 0.6 FTE on our total budget. Other FTE increases or changes in FTE will be absorbed by reduction in enrollment at this grade 6 level. A world language teacher, we've added an ASL course in response to state graduation requirement changes. We're made a commitment to the Board of Education that when we added the DEI position out of the ARP-ESSER funding, that over the course of the 3 years, we would apportion each year a piece of that FTE back into general funds. So this year, 0.3 of that position has been added back into general funds. And then, as mentioned earlier, the cybersecurity analyst support needs in the district. Go ahead. I won't get into all this, but again, this is just some more detail on the budget changes driven by salary, benefits, and operations. Our FTE chart follows, and we can get a larger copy of this for you if that's desired. People personnel on the next slide. And again, the breakout across the three major categories of the budget where the changes in special education show up. And Mr. McCusey's on here, but we are going to talk about this, set some context on that right now. So this is the budget trend over the last few years in pupil personnel. You can see in the blue where we've had to do budget transfers to respond to changes in what we had initially budgeted based on increases. The question rightfully has been raised, and we'll answer that in a couple slides, but is what we're seeing in changes in special education services a Fairfield concern, or is it rooted in, or is it reflective of larger trends across the state? And it is reflected in larger concerns across the state, but we'll talk about that more in a second. So what we attempted to do this year in writing our budget was to address the issues of these transfers and to do all we could to reduce the need for those transfers, because they do have an impact on other budget accounts that we have set forth. James, if you can go back a slide. Sorry, there you go. So what you'll see is if you compare the last year to the the current year, excuse me, to the projected year of 2022-23 is our work to respond to the trend and close that gap in funding for special education. Go ahead now. We provided this slide last year, and we bring it forward again because one of the things that we talk about when we talk about the needs of special education students, it's not just the increase in this number of students, but it's the increase in the number of students with significant disabilities and the resulting costs that come with addressing those needs. So if you just take an area like in red, the dyslexia area, you'll see that over time we've gone from 6 students to 87 students. And you can see on the bar graph in that red, the corresponding increase in what that's done to costing. So again, this is often lost in the dialogue around the needs of special education students. It's the severity of needs of some students and the corresponding need for support for those students that drives a lot of the cost. The next slide is our enrollment and staffing trends from 14 to 22. And you can see again here, the increase in orange on the special ed population. While the overall population of the students has declined by 7.7%, the overall increase in special ed education has increased by 24%. And that seems large, and it is. But we're going to get to that in another minute, another slide. Actually, if you just stick with that for a minute, again, 24% increase in special ed enrollment over the past 6, 7, 8 years. The next slide is an update of what you saw last year. This is basically just a timeline of staffing changes in the Fairfield Public Schools. Regular education is in blue. In orange are special ed changes in FTE. These have been attempts and are working attempts to address the issues of the number of students that we have, and again, the significance of their disabilities. So we have spent, and the board and you have supported over the years, an increased ability of our capacity to address those concerns. This is the state trend that we're seeing in enrollment. And again, if you take a look at this, the increase in total enrollment across the state is 23%. Ours was 24%. The overall decrease in regular education is 8%, and ours was 7.7%. So we're almost a mirror image of the changes that are happening across the state. I want to come back to we're going to leave special ed for the moment, talk about instructional materials and IT equipment replacement. This is a total requested increase of, if you look to the second paragraph to the left, the overall investment for capital technology is 1.6 million. I will put in front of you now, and certainly we can discuss it further, but in light of the First Selectwoman's cut to our budget, one of the things that we look at immediately as a way to address that reduction is the idea that if we were able to lease computers, we could significantly address that reduction immediately. I know that that's a town consideration, but I want to put it in front of you as one way for us to address this issue. Other changes, again, just really a very small percent, 0.19% of our total increase. And again, some of this was reduced even further with changes that we made and pulled funding out of the ARP and ESSER and the ESSER 2 grant. Real quickly, I want to go over the district improvement plan goals on the next slide. These are right now draft goals. The board has seen these. The district improvement steering committee is still working on these. We are presenting, we are in the midst of developing the action steps to support these goals. And we'll be presenting to the board in May a final district improvement draft for the next 5 years. to go over these, and at some future Board of Select in meeting, I'd be very happy to come and go over this in more detail, as I really would value your input and thoughts on where we are heading in the district. Next slide is really just a overview of how our budget is reflected, or these 4 goals are reflected in our budget and specific actions that are taken. And then the next slides are a series of slides, and I won't go into these in great detail, but again, I would encourage you to read these, because I think in general, speaking broadly about these, they address our efforts to proactively expand the capacity of our staff to reduce the issues around special education. So, for example, when we look at something relatively simple like, even at this first slide, math resource teachers and language arts teachers, the need is, regardless of any change in the middle school schedule or not, the need now exists at Roger Ludlow and Fairfield Woods to provide more support for students who are falling behind. This is not special education support, this is regular education support. The goal of these positions would be to catch those students up in time in school so that they don't fall further behind and then fall into the need for special education and additional services. So this is a preventative measure that we want to put into place. The next slide, the Early Literacy Academy. We currently have a one-year program right now working at McKinley. This is an effort to keep our students who are struggling to read in district. We know that there are more students beyond this single classroom that we need to address. So we want to expand it, given the success that we're currently seeing at McKinley. And again, the effort being that first priority is to keep kids in district where they belong. And then if we're able to do that and address their reading needs here, then we are going to prevent the outplacement costs that drive so much of our budget. World language, really quickly. This right now is projected as an increase of a 1.0 FTE. I will tell you and this is an American Sign Language course that we wanted to offer at both high schools in Walter Fitzgerald. And it is in response to a change in the state's graduation requirements, which go into effect for our current junior class. I did hear from our world language coordinator last evening, Ms. Frankel, and we currently have, as the high school students are enrolling in courses for next year, we currently have an enrollment of 150 students from both Ward and Ludlow for ASL courses. So my expectation would be that with 150 students drawing from existing world language programs, we'll likely see a corresponding reduction in FTE in those other areas. And as we move forward and address the scheduling and the class loads at the high schools in the next couple of months, we'll make corresponding reductions in FTE as a result of that. So I just want to assure everyone going forward that this won't be an add if we're able to reduce in other areas. About $44,000 for stipends to support our middle school SRBI programs, our intervention programs. So those teachers at each of the schools can work an additional half a month to prepare for the incoming students, and we can begin interventions and supports on day one. And a couple of smaller pieces around just providing some instructional leadership for teams. Again, I spoke about the DEI administrator coming off. This is a $20,000 item. I put this in based on my past experience in when I was in Milford. We are aware that we have a lot of things in closets. We are aware that we could be spending things to buy new when we might actually have it stored someplace and people have lost sight of it. So essentially what I would like to do next year is create a position, a part-time person, to take an inventory of what's out there. If we have stuff that's old and needs to be disposed of, it should be done. If we have stuff that can be sold off, we should do that. If we are in a position where we can donate to somebody more needy, we should be able to do that. But we should identify the materials that we are currently using, get them into a central storage place, and make them accessible for staff. So I see this as a first-year investment. It may go beyond the first year, but we really don't have anybody right now keeping an eye on our closets, and we have a lot of closets, and some of them are very big. Again, the cybersecurity and the the security reporting tools. Prioritize this as an initiative to, given the increase that we've seen in hacking on school and town websites. We want to be able to up our privacy concerns and security for our students and staff. Again, technology replacement, I spoke about that. Major maintenance improvements are listed here. The high school scoreboard at Fairfield Ludlow, the gym court floor replacement at Burr, and repairing the student bathrooms at Marsh Hill. These are reductions that we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, based on enrollment. Other changes that we made. And then just this last slide, we recognize and we continue to work towards the structural changes that need to happen to further reduce costs in Fairfield Public Schools. You see some of that in some small ways here, but we know that the board in its recent vote to adopt a facilities committee is looking at the larger changes that are necessary in order to bring about some more substantial lasting changes to our budget. So thank you. And if there's questions, we're happy to answer them. Actually, before I don't know if there's any slides you wanted me to go back to. I should have said this too quickly. If there was any slides you wanted to go back to, or we can just go right into questions.
Thank you, Mike. So I appreciate the presentation. I just wanted to follow up on one thing. The chief financial officer requested the Board of Ed 10 days ago for a breakdown on the special ed costs. And we haven't gotten anything back yet, because it's just one line essentially, but it doesn't have like a breakdown of those costs. Do you have that?
Oh,
Go ahead. Courtney, why don't you introduce yourself? Some folks don't know you yet.
sure. I apologize. Hello, everyone. Hello, Selectwoman. I'm Courtney Laborious. I'm the Executive Director of Finance and Business Services. We'd be happy to provide a breakdown of the costs. Should I work directly with the CFO to determine exactly what detail he's looking for?
Yeah, Courtney, this is Jared. I'd be happy to work with you. I had requested information specifically on numbers of settlements and costs related to that, as well as legal costs related to special ed.
Okay, Jared, is that in addition to that detailed summary I sent you a few weeks ago?
Yes, it was a follow-up to that.
Okay, I do apologize.
Courtney, could you expand on the detailed summary that you sent? What information was there that we didn't necessarily receive today? And thank you. Hi.
Sure. Hi, Ms. Lefkowitz. Sure, that was a summary of settlements and outplacements for the tuitions, as well overtime going back to 17-18 to present and projected, as well as the projected revenues, settlement numbers broken out with outplacement numbers, and the expenditure and projected expenditure for professional expense, nursing, speech services, homebound, OTPT, and then the ancillary facility, travel, copying expenses as well. So historical trend with some placement numbers that have been published numbers, as well as the projection for the upcoming year.
Because it would be interesting to see, not just, I'm curious, because one of the questions I had referred to outplacement costs versus the increased costs that we're facing as a district. So I was interested in that. Sorry, Brenda, were you going to say something? I didn't mean to jump in.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So I'm just going to open it up to the board for questions.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you all. And Courtney, just to close out that thought, I didn't mean to jump in ahead. As I said, my questions did relate to the outplacement costs versus the increased costs that the superintendent referred to. So that would check that box, and thank you. And if I may, I just wanted to say thank you so much to the superintendent and to the whole team here, to the Board of Ed. And I have been I've been copied on the receiving end both of a lot of praise, which I want to start with because you do incredible work and it's been a challenging year, 2 years really, on top of what are already challenging times. But so you've received a lot of praise, but I also know that you've been on the receiving end of some less than savory responses from people. And I just want to say that you always handle everything with professionalism and with the kids in mind, and you really try to keep that the main focus. And I appreciate that, and you and all the work that your team does at central office. So thank you for that, and thank you for keeping the kids top of mind always, first and foremost, and sort of keeping away from some of the fray. And I really do appreciate that. And it takes out some of the air, and that hasn't gone unnoticed. So thank you. I do have a couple of questions. Tom, is it okay if I keep going?
Absolutely.
I want to highlight a few things. One, for me, as always, when I'm sitting at this table over the past few years, we've been presented with a budget by the Board of Education that has been passed unanimously. And so for me, that's always kind of an intriguing data point that you've got the Board of Ed has battle tested and really stretched and argued and heard from the community and presented a budget that they feel can best accomplish what it needs to, keeping the whole child in mind, the total child in mind, the health, the safety, the well-being of all our students. And, when we talk about the number of kids that we're educating, it's not just fair to say it's about, the X number of children. You still have facilities to keep going and staff and contractual obligations. And this year, again, with the increase of the social and emotional needs of our students at a high, with the social emotional needs of our teachers at a high, and those being things that you're addressing in this budget. So I'm appreciative that you presented one budget, superintendent, to the Board of Ed, and again, they tested it and came to us with another. And so, I'm inclined to support that. I just want to understand, and you touched on this a little bit, what a reduction as being proposed by the first Selectwoman would look like. I think it's important for people to hear what it is that we're really talking about, because having to cover contractual obligations and the rising costs of special ed, et cetera, what is it that we're looking at that would suffer?
Thank you. I'm gonna just, flipping back on my own slide deck, just to, we don't have to put it back up, but in case people want to reference it. It's slide 15, excuse me, no, I'm sorry, it's slide 11. So on slide 11, we broke out the major budget drivers, and the, if you take that almost in two separate sections, you've got the ongoing expenses of salaries and benefits, the maintenance of buildings, utilities, and transportation, kind of your set costs. That's a 2.7, that's 2.72 of the 5.42 requested increase. You add to that the special ed requirements or request, which as you can see, based on the charts we provided, is really based on our experience and our expected trends and what we're seeing. So between the two of those, right, we're at almost 5% right there, almost exactly 5%. So when those are things we have to do. So when we look at where the 2.5 million would come from, we're looking at the other areas around potentially IT equipment and the ability to because we are concerned about the aging out of some of our machines and operating systems. But then a lot of it then comes into the instructional services. I'm just reading through this, the contracted services, all these other pieces that really between both the technology and these other areas are about 0.44% of our request. So to go beyond that, right, we're going to cut into the existing, and the only place really that I see being possible, given the needs in special education, goes back to that top column where we look at salaries and benefits. And I recognize, I've been doing this a very long time, and I recognize that that's where boards of education always kind of go, and it can be perceived as a scare tactic and those types of things. But the truth being told, when you look at our budget laid out like this, that's really the only place we can identify as we've just started this work. I want to be really clear. We've just started this work, but we can only identify that if we think about where programs exist and staffing exists, that right now we consider essential to the overall mission of the Fairfield Public Schools. Those are things that we may have to suddenly start to think about as, unfortunately, expendable. It's not the really word I want to use, but that they become now in focus as potential targets for reduction. I'm hesitant, and I will say that, Ms. Lefkowitz, we're going to present to the board at their March 8th meeting. We're going to present a tentative first draft of potential cuts to the board at that point. I'm hesitant to get any more details now because we really haven't explored that, but internally I'm in central office, and I have to talk to my administrators in the buildings as well. But that's really right now where we're kind of focusing.
And it's my understanding that the Board of Ed was really aggressive already in its insurance budgeting, as well as, tapping into grants. So, I recognize the challenge. The other thing I just want to talk about is how appreciative I am of things, and I know I speak for many, many people on a few fronts. The resource manager to identify potential savings, spend now to really understand where you're at and to do that kind of internal audit, if you will. And I appreciate that, but specifically cybersecurity was recommended. I know that's like a really big issue, but for me, something that speaks to me personally is the investment of a DEI officer and really expending what is a necessity for our school system. The energy and the time and the resources, and making that commitment to focus on issues of equity and justice across the school system, and how that's going to be so meaningful and impactful. And already I know in speaking with Digna Marta with a group of parents, concerned parents this week, and I hope the school system will have an opportunity to really talk about what some of those incredible, in her short tenure already, some of the things she's been able to accomplish. And, even looking at some of the district improvements and the opportunity, the achievement opportunities that her presence really will signal and signifies, and what she's doing already. So I just wanted to say thank you for that, and thank you for your commitment to that, and putting it, your money where your mouth is, really quite literally in the line items of this budget. So, those are top line for me. I don't mean to turn this into a monologue. I'm sure I'll have other things, but thank you.
Thanks, Nance. Brenda, I don't know if you want to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. So Mike, I
Brenda,
know last year we.
your volume is a little, Brenda, your volume is a little bit muffled this time. I don't know why.
Sorry, I didn't have I was charging the microphone thing.
Oh, that's probably what it is, yeah.
Can you hear me okay now?
It's better. Thank you.
So Mike, last year when we went through this process, we were talking about, restructuring and offsetting expenses and such. And in my budget, the reduction was $2 million. And then that carried through till the end. So the final budget was a $2 million reduction to the Board of Ed request. And then at the end of the year, the Board of Ed had a surplus. So can you help me to understand, we heard about programs being cut and so on and so forth, but there wasn't any of that, and that you ended up with a surplus. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, let's face it, it's not just me, but the residents of the town are going to want to understand that the argument last year was there was going to be severe reduction in program, and then that you guys ended up with a surplus. So that's going to be a real question that people are going to want to know the answer to.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. I appreciate you bringing that up. Well, I think, if you think back to about a year ago when we were doing this, one of the things that took place before, between when the board presented the budget to you, and we got to this point where the Board of Selectmen were hearing our budget proposal, the town identified significant savings in health insurance. That was right off the top, helped us address that budget reduction, and well credit to your staff for doing that. We also saw during the course of the year, and I'm gonna struggle to recall this. I don't know if Ms. Vitale might be able to help me with remembering some of the things that took place in the spring.
Well, I think that there was just a, being that we were still in the pandemic, that we did see some savings. Money was not spent. Certain things didn't happen. Professional development, we couldn't get people together, so we saw savings there. There was also a change, I believe, in the pension number after the budget was approved by the RTM. We also, as a way of mitigating the reduction, increased our our open choice revenue to comply with our racial imbalance plan. So we saw some income to offset the budget reduction. But the majority was from the change in the health insurance number. That information was new information to the school district and the Board of Education. The number that we were given by Aon back in the fall when we built the budget was higher than what came out as the year progressed. We did take that into consideration in building this year's budget. And when we were building it, and Ms. LaVoice, correct me if I'm wrong on my numbers, was recommending, I believe, 7%. Based on our experience last year and seeing that there was a savings in the health insurance number right as the Board of Selectmen was voting, we brought that down to 6.5% in this budget. We have since found out, actually, the night that the Board of Education voted, we received some information from the state that they are now projecting the health insurance number at 8%. Now, that is somewhat in flux, and if anybody in Town Hall has received different information than we have received, I would be definitely open to hearing that. We, of course, hope to hear favorable, any kind of rate reduction is good news for us, and would be open to hearing that. But right now, we did bring it down to the 6.5% based on last year's experience. And I don't know if I'm forgetting anything. The executive directors want to chime in if there's anything else in terms of what transpired, last year. But
No,
we were still, we were still in the pandemic. And I think that when we built the budget, we were not budgeting for a pandemic. It ended up going longer than was anticipated, and there was savings in transportation. More people were driving their children to school, and a combination of a lot of little things just added to things getting, I wouldn't necessarily call it a surplus in terms of a reallocation to different accounts. There was a surplus in the health insurance number, but we also put more money into special education. So I would be hesitant to say surplus. We did make reductions in staffing. In a secretary in central office, a reduction there. The high school principals went back and went through their staffing models, found a reduction of 3 full-time positions at the high school. We also went out to bid when the administration was building their budget, and when the Board of Ed approved our budget, the OT and PT contract was out to bid. That came back, realizing a savings about $300,000, which had a positive impact to our budget. And thankfully, we didn't have to make reductions that directly impacted programming. But right now, based on the information that we have in terms of the health insurance number, the number about excess costs for special education, inflation, the rising costs of fuel, right now what's happening with Russia and the Ukraine, I'm even more concerned about what fuel costs might look like in the next few months. So there's still some uncertainty. I think that with any reduction, we of course try to keep it away from the classroom. But 2.5 million right now with the information we have is significant. We wanted to true up the special education number, so we're not faced in the situation that we're in right now, looking at a deficit and having to freeze hiring, putting off our capital purchases until the spring. And I'll stop babbling there, but hopefully that answers your question and gives you a little bit more color about how last year played out.
Thank you, Ms. Vitale.
No, I appreciate it, and, I was going to bring up, that, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate you bringing up those special ed costs, because you know what, the CAO into, Selectwoman, Lefkowitz's, comments earlier, Mr. Bremer, did some work with the Board of Ed and the RFPs on the physical therapy and occupational therapy, and was able to, through an RFP process, was able to help utilize those savings. So his efforts helped the school district save $500,000, which is a significant amount of money. So his efforts to work with the school district and our purchasing department did help realize those savings. So those are some of that, you know, to Mr. Bremer's credit, and I just want to note that, that's a $500,000 saving to the budget.
Well, and I do
so-
appreciate the
so
town's
those-
help on that, but us going out to bid on that was something that has been discussed at the board level for, you know, prior to it going into town purchasing. I do appreciate the help of Mr. Bremer in getting that RFP out, and appreciate the work of administration in moving that forward. And I think that Mr. Cummings had something else to add about last year.
Oh, sure, go right ahead.
I'm going to add, Ms. Kupchak, that Ms. Vitale, I think, did a great job kind of summarizing that, but what we can do is we can get you a breakout of exactly what transpired between the, you know, essentially February and the May board's adoption of the final 21-22 budget. We'll get a breakout of that for you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And I just wanted to note for the board, last night, during the actuary's presentation, the Board of Ed's pension payment will be about $505,000 less than the Board of Ed budgeted in its request. So I'm sure you were aware of that, Christine, but I don't think the Board of Selectmen is aware of that, because it just happened last night. So I just wanted to say before I open it back up to the.
Sorry, can you just expand on that? What's the implication to the current
The
budget?
savings to the Board of Ed budget.
Actuaries, right, the actuaries who do for the town, you know, we got numbers late right before our budget was completed. We were here till after 11 o'clock Thursday night before we submitted our budget, posted it on that Friday. We had gotten information that day, Jared mentioned during the budget presentation, that the town side pension cost went down because we had, unfortunately, a lot of retirees who passed away. And so it reduced our costs. And it is the same thing, Nancy, based on the actuary's presentation last night, the Board of Ed's pension payment will be $505,000 less than what was budgeted in the book. So I just think that's important for everyone, the Board of Ed, the Board of Selectmen to know.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention before I open it back up, you know, we did, you know, an analysis of this. And so the average request from Board of Ed has been about 4% on average over the last 10 years. And the town has, on average, over the last 10 years, only given the education 2.8%. So this year, in my budget, the increase is 4.12% increase to what the current budget was last year, and that's $7.9 million additionally on top of. So I just wanted to note that for not just the Board of Selectmen's edification, but also for any public that's listening. I'll open up to the board for any questions, additional detailed questions on the budget.
Yeah, I do. First of all, thanks for all the hard work that went into this budget, and welcome to our new finance director on the Board of Education side. Talk about trial by fire. We look forward to working with you. Mr. Cummings, in your PowerPoint presentation, you discussed some new initiatives and things. Can you just list those for me one more time, the new initiatives that are included in the budget, please?
Certainly. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to go back to the.
Sure. And the gentleman, I did not catch your name, sir, who was running the PowerPoint earlier, and my apologies. Can you pull that back up and bring that back up?
Yeah,
Sure.
Dr. Sevchenzik. James, could you bring that up? And go to
Nice to,
slide, 24,
yeah.
next one. There you go.
Okay, so you had the middle school schedule, you had cybersecurity, I recall, right? You
Yep.
had, what else did you have?
You had the Early Literacy Academy expansion and the
Yeah.
P that goes with that. Mr. Flynn, if, actually, James, if you go to the next slide with that, early literacy, you're there, okay. Early Literacy Academy. I talked about the academy expansion. One of the things I didn't talk about was the professional learning we're providing to our early elementary staff, K1, 2. Because what we're trying to do, not only provide a place for students who are really struggling to read to go to within district, but we're increasing the capacity of our early elementary teachers to more effectively teach reading skills to students,
Yeah.
so that we can address this at what we call the tier 1 level or the classroom level, in order to avoid additional costs that come with reading interventionists and special education programs. So that's part of it as well.
So those are the key initiatives, the new initiatives for this year. There's 4 of them, plus you were dealing with some of the COVID-related stuff throughout the course of the year, right?
Primarily, yes.
Yeah. So my question would be this. Last year when we got together, and it was after a number of years, we had asked for it a number of years, we talked about structural change, and we had what some would term a significant cut to your budget. I viewed it as a reasonable cut to your budget. So my question is, why is not one of the initiatives this year, after all those discussions, after all those years, structural change on this year's budget?
On the proposed budget?
Yeah, we got all this other stuff. We have all the new initiatives, which, by the way, I'm not questioning them or the value of them. That's not my purview, my place, or my expertise. But we discussed structural change for many number of years, and we specifically addressed it, and were put into an awful position of a decrease in your budget last year. And we very strongly articulated, and it was held up by the Board of Finance and by the RTM, that we were looking for structural change because the town couldn't continue to afford the increases year over year. Yet this year we get a budget that has 4 new initiatives, and again, I'm not questioning the value of the initiatives, but no initiative on structural change.
Well,
It's as if it was ignored for this budget cycle.
No, Mr. Flynn, it wasn't ignored. I think it talks about how you define structural change. So in an education system, there's the structural changes that can come quickly, right? There's the changes that come when school systems reorganize, they close the school, they redistrict. There's those types of structural changes that can come. Let me take a step back. And when you're making change, well, you're making change not just in the educational system, but when you're making a change in any organization, right? You're doing it not only to increase the efficiency of the operation, but you're looking to increase the performance of the operation as well. So it's you're finding a better way to do business that both benefits the business as well as the consumer. In education, there are those structural changes that are possible, right? There are the structural changes. The district has talked about redistricting for a number of years. Those are things that the district is committed to moving forward.
So what steps have been made in the past year? What's the progress that's been made in the past year?
In our work, going back through these initiatives, back to the initiatives in front of you, these are rooted in structural changes. One of the things that we're seeing in the middle school block schedule is the opportunity to better support students in class in order to prevent learning loss and to better provide intervention so that they don't wind up in special education services and ultimately reduce
at an increased cost.
Well, that's
increased staffing.
If you're going to make the changes that are going to reduce costs, you have to invest someplace. We just can't.
That's not what was articulated. And I don't see what's going on with redistricting. Where does that stand now? Has anything been launched on that yet? Any progress? Has there been a committee formed? Where does that stand? If that's one of the structural change, I'm not saying that it is. I'm asking.
I'm going
No,
to jump in here. The Board of Education brought back the Facilities Committee. One of the charges of that committee will be looking at enrollment projections and facility utilization. Redistricting is part of our current racial imbalance plan. I will share that we gave an update to the State Board of Education, actually the Policy Committee of the State Board. And at this point, the board is, and really, the tenure of the community right now, our school community has been through trauma.
Horrible. Yeah.
Has been through trauma. I mean, I don't mean to be over dramatic, but I think that really is an accurate word. For the past 2 years, our schools had the difficult task of operating in a crisis while also trying to provide a sense of normalcy to over 9,000 students. And while our schools, have thankfully been open for full in-person instruction since last March, and we were one of the first districts in the state to bring K through 12 back, the last year has not been normal. So I'll be completely honest with you, Tom, but furthering a discussion on redistricting right now, this year, has not happened. Our focus has been trying to keep kids in school, trying to bring back activities, and thankfully, we're getting there. Sports are back, concerts are back, school plays are happening. Mitigation strategies are backed off. Monday, masks will be optional. So redistricting has not been a priority, but we have created this committee. We're asking for updated enrollment projections from our schools, because when we met, the finance committee of the board met with what was formerly known as Malone and McBroom, now the SLAM Collaborative, to find out if the plans that they provided to us back in March of 2020 were still accurate.
Hey, Christine, just to,
Yep.
and first of all, thank you.
Yep.
And second of all, you never have to say just to be honest, because I know you're always honest. So there's no thought there
All right.
whatsoever.
Well, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I'm going to just tell it like it is. It's
And
been
that's
really,
fair. I just
right?
find it
And
hard to say we're doing all the new initiatives that are increasing cost, but
well,
yet
this
the
is.
one thing, hang on, please. Yet the
Go ahead.
one thing, that we're not doing is addressing structural change. And by the way, you're absolutely right. The last year's been difficult, but we've actually been talking about structural change and advocating for it for many years now. And last year was the first year when looking at the actual price points and the budget request that we were actually forced into a position protecting the overall taxpayer to take a chunk out of the Board of Ed budget, a larger chunk than normal because of that, right? And so it tells me, and then I read the budget book and I hear all this, it tells me that it's not getting the prioritization that the town bodies have said that it needs. And that's why, and maybe ignored, Mr. Cummings is a difficult word, but it's certainly not getting the priority, the attention, and once again, it puts us in a position where we're looking to reduce the spend. I'm not going to go into the detail of where you're spending your money right now, right? But it's an uncomfortable position to be put in when we've advocated this for years and years and years. And to see that it's gone nowhere as of present. And by the way, let me be very clear. It's not my role or my goal to say that it's redistricting or it's whatever. I'm just telling you the trend lines don't work.
Well, and I think that comes back to the definition of structural change. Changing the middle school schedule, that is a structural change that's happening within the school district.
Increasing expense, though.
Well,
That structural change is increasing expense.
If the definition is structural change is just decreasing expense, and let's be clear for the purposes of our conversation, is that structural change needs to equal a decrease in costs.
Can we go?
And let me finish.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of structural change and how we deliver services, the Early Literacy Academy, yes, it's an investment, but that is a change in how we are delivering early reading instruction to our most vulnerable students with the hope of keeping them in district and avoiding costs later. That is going to lead, hopefully, to a structural change. The Board of Education is, as I said, continuing to get more updated information on redistricting. There is mixed feelings about that as a structural change, the direction that the majority of the board wants to take right now, but the work on getting more information is happening. I would welcome, if you have town bodies, many of them have served on past boards, have served on past boards of education. If there is a major structural change that someone would like to see happen tomorrow, I would be open to hearing it.
Here's a thought. Here's a thought on that point. Can we put that PowerPoint back up? And can we go, there's, go to the page that's the strategic plan moving forward, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, we can stop there. And I know this is the draft goals. Do you know what's not in this draft goals? Anything about affordability. There's not, I used to talk with Dr. Title back in the day about what's the school system that the town can afford, right? And I think that this doesn't lay out the fact that all these are great goals, and don't get me the wrong way. I'm not questioning that. What I'm saying is they're great goals within a town that has a budget, because our taxpayers have a budget, because our taxpayers have a median income. So what this loses is the fact that we want to do the best we can at an affordable cost. And that's not here. I don't see any evidence in the discussions that we're having that we're taking into consideration that element of it. And I think we really need to take that into consideration, because the budget requests have become so high and they're dominating, and we continue to have increased budget requests. Well, enrollment's going down.
Can
And
I,
it's year after year.
can I make a comment on that, Tom? Because I think that question of affordability is sort of where the challenge is, because you could argue that this is a budget we can afford, that these are investments in our students, based on, that word affordability is sort of tricky, because I think that if we're looking at this holistically, I mean, we need to be looking at things like growth of grand list. What are the expenses now that the school system has to take on that the town previously, and here's a real question for you, actually, Christine, Ms. Vitale. Are there new costs to the district that, I know of one that were previously supported by the town that now the Board of Ed has to absorb in their budget, that the public schools have to absorb in their budget?
There are, Ms. Lefkowitz, and I'm gonna, Ms. Laborious, will you just give the detail, because you probably have the numbers quicker?
Sure, yeah, $320,000 in our budget for this year for a crossing guard program, for intramural insurance to support our intramural programs, and for salting the physical doing of the salting of the schools. All together costs about $320,000 in our estimate.
And can I jump in here too for a second? Nance, I appreciate what you're saying about the question of affordability, and that's a good conversation to have. What I don't like is every time we want to talk about justifying expense, we try to change it to a discussion about quote unquote investment versus expense. At the end of the day, it's cash out the door to our taxpayers. It's cash out of pocket to our taxpayers. When they're stretched, in a time where in the private sector, you're not seeing the salary increases, and you're certainly not seeing salary increases that are consistent with inflation. And so we've got to be cognizant of that, and asking repeatedly for increased requests in the 6% range when the average salary increases anywhere from 0 to 2.5% in the private sector. It's not sustainable, particularly when your number of your enrollment numbers going down.
But
And I appreciate all the pressures that we have with special ed and all those kind of things. But we've come to that tipping point where we really have to, in our education decisions, wrap our arms around affordability.
But I would also, and I appreciate that, and I like, you know, like you think that this is an important conversation to have, because I don't always think that this equates to the exact dollar amounts that are reflected in the line items of the budget. There are intangible things that factor in. For instance, the health, safety, well-being. You know, adding a DEI officer. That is a line item, and yet what it's offsetting is there are intangible things that we can't see in terms of reduction of certain mental health traumas that
But-
students are experiencing that are then, if we are not addressing them, we feel that cost down the line. So
Well, that's fair, but here's one thing we're doing, Nance, and I'll go back to the superintendent's comments, right? When you asked, and they were good questions regarding the drivers and what's going on, and if you cut it, where are you going to cut it? The superintendent immediately went to the fact that the biggest driver is salary and benefits, and sat there and said that, oh, that was very difficult, and it's really, the terminology was almost uncontrollable or something like that. Now, you did circle back to it, Mr. Cummings, but the reality is we've got to get our arms around the fact that as enrollment goes down, the number of people servicing the community probably has to be adjusted. That's unfortunate, but it's true, because it is the biggest single driver. And we certainly shouldn't be adding to it. Maybe we repurpose it. I don't know the answer there. But I'm just disappointed to see that the strategic, you know, the structural change and the strategic plans that we've asked for don't address that. And I think it's a concern for the town as a whole.
I guess
I don't, Ms. Lefkowitz, let me defend my budget. I appreciate your support.
I'm not attacking your budget, by the way.
Oh, no. Hey, it's failing a little bit because I think that you're making assumptions about our strategic planning. And in talking about, and we have not been asking for a 6% increase every year. I take
No, it was 5% last year. What was it last year?
It was 4.99% last year.
5%.
But
No, that's
yes,
what got approved, was it not? Or what got approved?
4.5.
And by the way,
That also in fills, I don't want to go back and replay filling the hole. If you look at the year before
I get
that,
it.
our budget was 1.56.
But
So
the other
last
thing,
year
Christi-
was making up, it was, Tom, when you say that I'm asking for 6% every year, and
I
I'm
didn't
not
mean
being,
every year. My apologies if I
well,
said that.
and
But the other thing here is when you say that I'm making assumptions, I'm not. I asked very specifically what the new initiatives were. The 4 new initiatives that laid out, none of the new initiatives were structural change. The new initiatives were new services being provided or provided in a different way. So I didn't make any assumption whatsoever about the budget. It's what I was told. It's what's being put in front of me. So I wasn't assuming anything.
well, that is, from an educational standpoint, that is a structural change. It may not be a less expensive structural change, but it is a structural change.
Oh, so last year it wasn't clear when we said we're looking for structural change and we cut the budget by $2 million. It wasn't clear that we were looking for reduced expenses, not increased expenses?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
To go back to the question of structural change, one of my struggles, Mr. Flynn, all along has been that I think, and I'm not taking offense to your use of it, I think that there is this wide disparity about how people use the term, right? And I hear very clearly what you're saying. You're identifying it very much as a efficiency issue that, and I think what I hear you saying is that would also talk about improving services at the same time.
I would like to, absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, look, there's nobody at any town board level, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM. There's nobody, there's nobody in taxpayers that I've ever heard say we want to decrease the quality of the services in education. I mean, the town is very proud of what you do.
Yeah, yes, and I have heard that for 7 years I've been in the district, and I hear it from you now, and I appreciate that. I think that one of the things that we're working with though is I'm going to just separate out one of the initiatives, which is the Early Literacy Academy. Mr. Mancusi can get into the numbers of this, but I spoke earlier for a minute. I talked about the fact that our number of dyslexic students in the district has risen over the past several years from 8 to 87, so almost an 11-fold increase. Many of those students are outplaced, and that is driving our outplacement tuition tremendously. The reason they're outplaced is twofold. One, the district had not been spending money appropriately providing professional development to its early primary students, K2, pre-K2 teachers, in order to better instruct in reading, particularly around the areas of phonics, phonemic awareness, those issues. That's one of the issues. The other issue was we didn't have a corresponding place for these students to go. So the only alternative for parents who are struggling to see this with their kids is they're going to find an alternative solution. We then have to approach that problem from both those perspectives. We have to build the capacity of the teachers, and I want to be really clear, raise the expectation for our principals in our schools that this is no longer going to be tolerated, that this issue has to be addressed at the classroom level, and cast a wider net to prevent this from happening. We know. Let me just finish this up. So, but we also know that there will still be students who struggle to read, right? Who are going to be dyslexic. So corresponding issue then is we have to build the program in-house. If we're able to invest in a teacher and 2 paraprofessionals in a classroom that we already have, we're investing about $140,000, $150,000. That's the cost of 3 outplacements right now. We can bring 7, 8 kids into that program. We're going to see savings over time. And then, so I hear what you're saying, but believe me, when we approach this problem, we're approaching this problem from a structural change that the investment now we expect, and are going to hold people to, is going to reduce costs and provide a better education.
By how much? What I don't get out of that, and I appreciate what you're saying, what I don't get out of it is by how much is it going to reduce costs in the future? Because I've heard programs, right, and this happens throughout government, I'm not picking on education.
Yeah.
I've heard programs that say, we're going to invest now and we're going to get the savings later. And then guess what? I never get the savings later. And the programs continued because, well, people like the programs.
That's right.
Right. And it's like, no, what's the definition of success of the program? Right? The definition of success isn't everybody's happy. It's got to be that it gets its intended goals of also decreasing costs and, to your point, improving services. And
so there's three indicators of success we're seeking. One is that we identify overall less students who need these additional interventions in reading. That's the first indicator of success. The second indicator of success would be for those students who do require those additional interventions, that we address those interventions in-house and prevent students from leaving the district. And then the third indicator would be that you, as a result of those first two, you'd see not only a decrease in outplacement tuition, you'd also see a decrease in special ed services, because that first level of success is having an impact. I mean, one of our goals district improvement plan, one of our goals of district improvement plan, and this is going to be difficult to achieve because there's not a district right now that's doing this. I want to be really clear. One of our goals is that every kid finishes grade 2 reading at grade level. So, because we know that if we establish that as a baseline, that so many other issues that come up for kids later on in terms of learning loss and grades and college and all those other things that come with it will be addressed at the point where it does matter the most. So that is a structural change. And this is an expectation that quite honestly hasn't been held in the district before.
And what I want to know is I want to actually, as part of that, put numbers to it and say, what's the definition of success numbers wise in terms of kids and in terms of dollars and in terms of savings on that? I'm fully in favor of that. I get it.
We did.
We're just not seeing the other side of it.
Right, I understand that, because it's not, I understand that very clearly, and this is one of the struggles we face when we present. I will share with the board, Mr. Mancusi presented to the Board of Ed in December an update on our academic, the Early Literacy Academy. I will get you that presentation so you can see mid-year rates on success for the first part of the program.
And I do really think that when you guys go and put the district improvement plan together, I do think a key component of that has to be, the affordability in that, because otherwise it's unrealistic, right?
We agree.
We're going to continue to have this discussion year after year
Yeah, I
after
agree.
year.
Flynn, I'd rather not have the discussion.
Yeah, me too.
Me neither.
Okay. But yes, we totally agree with you. And we have talked about the board is making bylaw changes to bring in this facilities committee, because we have said to the board, and the board is in agreement with us, that really is, to your point, you identified it, it's the fifth goal. That's the fifth goal that we, and there's a large element of that that's going to need the support of the administration and the staff and the board around that piece, particularly.
Well, look, I thank you, and Christine, I thank you for your comments as well. And it's a good discussion, but I think we do have to move forward on it. And I thank you for putting up with me for the last 20 minutes to a half hour.
Tom, I totally was expecting it. It wouldn't be a budget season without this discussion.
I guess it's also like important to decide philosophically, and Tom, this is, me just sort of thinking about this out loud, where we sit on, increased class size, because, when you talk about structural change, like, are we talking about the increase in class size? Like, I don't sit in a place where that is a good idea. Reducing number of teachers has been talked about. Like, I sit from a place that I don't think that's a good idea, and reducing the services we provide and the options. And I think it goes back to your question about what's an investment and changing language. I think it's an important semantic discussion, and again, not for this table necessarily at this moment. It's just what do we bring to the table? And for me, that differentiation between investment and expense and what's quote affordable is really what plays into it for me. So,
and Nance, my comment on the investment side wasn't necessarily targeted at you.
I don't feel targeted.
I've been doing this a long enough time that I know anytime somebody's trying to, justify an expense, they flip it from it's not an expense, it's an investment.
Right.
And, and that's where I go, time out. Let's talk about this,
Again, it's not a flip, it's a perspective.
Yep. Thanks.
Well, and just for the early literacy, the outplays for the 7 students that we are currently providing or suggesting adding, the $486,339 will be the cost of outplacing those students. The cost of the staffing for the early literacy was $199,281. So, to your point, Tom, we do hear you right now, and are looking to do both. Structural change that improves educational outcomes for our students and that ultimately saves money.
If I could just add,
and that will be, the board has talked about as we put new programming in to have a metric to measure it.
And I apologize. I just wanted to add, what's hidden in the details is that there is a redirection of paraeducators. So, that could be considered a structural change in the sense of what you're speaking of, because the paraeducators that were dedicated to a different purpose are not being added to the budget. They're being repurposed to support this function. That's just one example of, there are pieces of the budget. So the technology request is afforded by many other reductions that aren't shown here. So perhaps as part of the presentation, in future presentations, we can also show the offsets and the things that were reprioritized that could be considered in the way that you're speaking about it, reprioritizations that do reflect structural change that's not as evident when we look at it in the sum total.
And I think that as the board has these discussions, the facilities committee, and
My
the
apologies, I
community
was on mute.
hears about some ideas, especially around facilities utilization and we throw around words like redistricting. It'll be interesting to hear what the community is willing to pay for, and hear a better voice about where they want to make the investment of their tax dollars. It wouldn't be
What
a
I
budget
think is,
presentation until I make the pitch for our school district is one of our town's greatest assets. I've been listening to your meetings for the last 2 days and hearing about how the real estate market is doing well in town. And I have to think that the Fairfield Public Schools continues to be a shining star, that people are coming here, they're moving here, they're raising their families here, they're staying here, they're coming back, after growing up here. And that is in large part to the people sitting before you today and to our town for making the investment in our education system. So I thank you, Mr. Flynn, for all your years of support on that front, and looking forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Christine. So listen, I know it's getting a little heated talking about, all of this, and I know it's emotional. Listen, I think I'm only one of 2 first select people who ever served in this role that actually served on the Board of Ed. And so I have a unique perspective and appreciation, frankly. 6 years of being on the Board of Ed gave me the opportunity to understand our school district and how it works in a way that, other people just don't. And so when I put that reduction in my budget, it wasn't lightly. I didn't do it lightly. I take into consideration how hard everybody works. And I know what the focus is. I understand, and I care deeply about making sure that every single student in our school district gets what they need. That is all of our responsibilities, 100%. I just felt that increase, to Tom's point, was very, very high. And I am in different shoes now, and I said this to the chairwoman the other day on the phone. When you wear a different hat, and I have a responsibility now to 61,000 people with competing needs. And as Nancy pointed out, that that she applauds the school district for running an organization during a global pandemic. Well, we were running a town during a global pandemic, and that was very challenging, extraordinarily challenging. And frankly, Mike and I would sit on the phone on Fridays and just cry on each other's shoulders about how difficult it was to lead an organization during a very challenging time. But I do believe, and honestly do believe, that we can do these things. We can make changes and support a top-level educational system in our town, top-level services for our residents as a whole at an affordable price. And so that's what I've been really working hard on, reprioritizing, how I deliver services in the town, eliminating positions that no longer make sense and filling them with positions that do, and then adding some positions in very strategic ways, right? So I get it. I know costs are up. I know they are. But the reduction that I put in the budget, I truly believe, and again, it was my reduction. I put it in there. And ultimately, what happens here is based on that budget that was put forward. I truly believe that it's not going to have this monumentally negative impact on our school district. I believe that, or I wouldn't have put it in. $7.5 million increase, I think, is a significant investment in our kids. It is. I leave it up to the professionals, just like I used to say when I was on the Board of Ed. And some Board of Ed members would think that they were educational professionals and would like to tell the superintendent how to run the schools.
And I used to think that that was very silly because they didn't have that experience. We have qualified people running our schools, very qualified. They understand academics, they understand curriculum, they understand the needs of our kids. And I have faith and trust in them. But I also have the belief that they will deliver services and give our children everything they need with the budget they're given. I do truly believe that. So I just wanted to say those things. I wanted each of you to understand that I don't want this to be an adversarial relationship. I respect each and every one of you guys. I know how hard you work. I respect the people who serve on the Board of Ed because I know firsthand how horrible it can be. It's been much more horrible for all of you, obviously, these last 2 years. But I want us to work together. And I know there's, this whole discussion of, tell us what to do. And, just like we sat around the table, I think it was a week or two ago, talking about our capital projects, the school district and the towns, and how we could work together under a cap, and so that we weren't, spending out of control, and that we were all getting things we need, but understanding that there's limitations, to what we can get, because we just don't have unlimited amounts of money. And to Tom's point, the taxpayers, they have, we have to be cognizant every single day about their ability to pay. Just like we are all doing this at our own houses, around our own kitchen tables. How are we affording this? How are we planning for that? Do I want something new in my house? Or maybe I want a new kitchen. So now we're going to cut back on vacation, or we're going to cut back on whatever it is. So it's the same thing, really.
Can I comment on something you just said, actually?
Sure.
Yeah, because I appreciate this. It's just, two things that just struck me. One, you talked about relying on the experts, and that's something I have gone back to again and again in the past 3 years, certainly, is we've been presented with a budget that the experts believe is the budget that they need to be successful in the operations of the school and to educate the total child. So it is, receiving a budget that was approved unanimously in a bipartisan way from a Board of Education that was passed down to from the superintendent, who are in fact the experts, and his team, is something that I also don't take lightly. And I also just wanted to look at the historical trends of, the percentages. And on page 13 of your budget book, the Board of Ed budget book, in early years, when you go back to 2002, it's 12%, it's 8%, it's 9%, it's 7%, so.
They were opening new schools and enrollment was growing.
There's always, quote, extraordinary circumstances. And as we're in a time of COVID, so I think that a demand for a 5% increase just feels to me that that's not an unreasonable when you look at the historical trends. 5.42%, that just doesn't, it seems less than, it's certainly in line with, but it's also less than what has historically been approved. So that's striking to me, those 2 points.
No, I hear you, Nancy, but what I think you're kind of leaving out of that equation is that our enrollment numbers have consistently gone down. And so that is actually that's a huge driver, right? That's an issue. And like I said earlier, the average request from our education side has been in the 4% range. And typically the town over the last 10 years has approved a 2.8% increase for the education side. Coming in with last year, I'll tell you, I've been involved in town government for 20 years. I started serving on the board, on the RTM in 1999. Served on the Board of Ed from 2003 to 2009. The last 2-year increase request, the highest I've ever seen, ever. And we spent significant amounts of money when I was on the board, on the RTM, for capital projects. We approved $260 million in a 2-year span, and that was to build Burr, that was to knock down McKinley and rebuild it, to open a third middle school, to reopen a second high school, renovations to Tomlinson. I mean, we put huge investments in our schools, and I was driving that bus, driving it very, very hard, because we hadn't invested in our schools in a really long time, and it was terrible. We literally had portables behind every single school building in this whole entire town. And so we made significant investments, and I supported every single one of them. And that was because we hadn't done it in a really, really long time. So now our enrollments are going down, and I just said we're always averaging at 4% over the last 10 years, and 2.8% is what's been given by the town. This, what I have included in my budget, a 4.12% increase, $7.5 million. That's an increase. That's a significant increase.
I think if I may.
So we reduced the budget by $2 million last year. And I didn't receive, besides the COVID impact on students, which was significant because they were out of school and on the line and sick and contact tracing and missing school. And so, I mean, you can't even really compare what that was like. But the educational experience, the quality of our teachers, our programs, all those things, none of those things that I saw has changed. I didn't hear any of that. Obviously, we heard the kids were emotionally having issues because they missed school. And of course that was going to happen. And I do know we're going to have a whole lot of mental health issues coming up from COVID. But I just think that this is a reasonable and fair reduction. And I believe and have faith in our school district to be able to work within those confines.
Ms. Kupchak, I think to your point about 10 years ago, I think the enrollment declining, I think you need to go back to that slide on special education. It's not necessarily just the numbers, it's just who those students are and what their needs are. And this budget right now is being driven by special education. You know, what is it, I don't have it in front of me, 2.26 is special education costs. It's the needs of our children that is driving this budget. And a lot of it is coming from, 2 years of living through a pandemic, which was not the investment when you were on the board that you made in our school district and your advocacy for education. But I don't think that you're comparing apples to apples of what we're dealing with right now for our teachers, for our families, and for our students. I don't think we should assume that this is the norm. I don't think that this is us meeting the needs, us listening to our educators and us meeting the needs of our students who, as we all agree, have really, borne the brunt of the last 2 years. And we have work to do for years ahead, and I appreciate the investment that is being put in, that our educators are keeping children first. And that is the budget that was put forward by the superintendent. The board, was sensitive and is sensitive to the greater needs of the town and the taxpayer, which is why we worked with the superintendent and staff to see if we could bring the initial request down, which we were able to do by doing some reductions and, maximizing the ARPA grant, the ARP ESSER grant, and the ESSER 2 grant, funding that actually was not meant to supplant local funding, but that is what we are doing right now, being cognizant and sensitive to the needs of the taxpayer, doing what we can on that front. But right now, this is being driven by student need. And I will leave it to the Board of Selectmen and future boards just to take that into consideration as you review our budget. And I hope that the news about pension, that is good news, and hopefully we will get more information similar to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Is there any additional questions or comments from the board?
Just one more. Just to put into context, I believe the grand lists back in 2010 was around 11.9, call it $12 billion. The grand list today sits at about $11.6 billion. So the grand list has not grown over that 10-year period. The value has not been, and that's after an uptick that's come during COVID. In fact, in 2017 to 2018, we were much closer to $10.8 billion in grand list. So it's stagnated. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional questions from the board?
I do
I'm
actually.
good.
Sorry, I do have one
No
dang
problem.
question. Something we didn't talk about was in the revenue source about open choice. You talked about it a little bit. I just want to advocate or at least understand, is that an area where we have more space? Is there an opportunity for additional revenue source if expanding that program, for instance? I'm just thinking, Tom brought up the grand list, so it made me think about revenue stream. And
Thank you. The current racial imbalance plan that the board adopted sets it at 100 students. We're at that maximum now. We're at that level now. So it would remain that way going into 20. We budgeted essentially for that, the level to remain as is for the next school year.
okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, and I mean, if the board elected to increase that, that would have to be discussion at the board level to increase that revenue. And Ms. Kupchak, and as you said, this has been a passionate discussion, but I don't want you to think that in any way it was adversarial. I think that we're all just coming from a good place for, our kids, our students, and for all of our town residents. So I thank you for your words, and I thank you for the conversation today. And again, I really want to just thank our school staff, our superintendent, our executive directors, everyone who has just shown up for our families these past 2 years. We really, words aren't enough, but I want to take this moment to publicly thank you. And I also, on the town side, it has truly been a collaborative effort. Chief McCarthy for the emergency management team last year, and we would be absolutely lost without Jill Mitchell and Sands Cleary for their support and direction over these last 2 years. So I want to thank them, and hopefully, we're coming out of this, but this town really should be really proud of all of its leaders. So thank you.
I appreciate you saying that, Christine. And you just bring up a really great point. The collaboration, right, between, even though we have separate budgets, right, the education and the town, we really are just one, right? And all the effort that, a lot of our people put into supporting our schools during this really awful, completely awful time. And your words to God's ears that this will be over soon, because I think we've all had just about enough of it. I think it's been a fine example of a community coming together, because we may have different opinions about things, but at the end of the day, we are all Fairfielders, and we care deeply about each other and about lifting each other up and supporting each other. And I think we were, like I said, perfect examples of that over the last couple of years. Even though sometimes people did get a little aggressive or emotional, let's say, about dealing with COVID. And I too want to thank the school district too for all their hard work and taking care of our kids, because they are our most important and precious assets of our town. And if we don't have any further, I would like to open it up for public comment. If there's anyone on the line who would like to speak to the items either that we spoke about this morning on the town side, or about the education budget we've been talking about in the afternoon portion. If you could put your name in the chat, Jackie is looking there to see if anybody is in that. Any members of the public? None. Well, that's 2 days in a row with no public comment. I don't know what that means. I don't know if
You
that's
gotta
good
start
or
meeting in
bad,
person.
actually.
You gotta start meeting in person. Come on, come
Well,
to the other side. The board has been meeting in person since August 2020. We get tons of public comment.
right. Well, I don't know. The first year we had our first budget meeting in the conference room, I think we only had like 5 people, and most of them were Board of Ed members. But
Because
okay, I hear you.
It was 2 days before a pandemic
gonna,
started.
We're going to be having our hybrid meetings. Hopefully, it's taking a little bit longer than I'd like, but we will be having it hopefully late spring. Although the planning and zoning, Mrs. Vitale, has a ton of public comment, even though their meetings are virtual. So I don't know what it means.
All right, maybe daytime meetings.
All right, everyone. Yeah, you're right. This is how it's typically done in the day. All right. Well, if there is no further comments or anything from the board, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here today and for providing the information that you did. And for the public, I would just say you can reach out to the Board of Selectmen with any of your comments, or you can always reach out to me either by email or calling Town Hall. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Have a very good day.
Thank you.
Take care now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Mike, snow day tomorrow. What do you think? Ice?
Oh, yeah, I want to know this. Snow day, no snow day. I'm staying
What do we
on.
think?
You have to wait till 4 in the morning. That's when Mike tells you to have to wake up.
No.
Oh, he conveniently is off.
Yeah, he's like, see ya, peace out. All right, bye,
Bye.
thank you.
Take care now.